The Seeing Child. The child who saw death before it arrived stood barefoot in the dust, dragging a bleeding man twice her size toward a house that had already buried one body. Her mother didn't know she was out here. The town didn't care. And the stranger watching from the ridge, hollow-eyed, half-dead himself, had spent 4 years walking past people exactly like this. But when 7-year-old Hope Weston lifted her face to the merciless summer sun and whispered, "I knew you'd come," Caleb Thornton realized he was done running. If you want to see how far a man can fall before a child pulls him back, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The heat that summer didn't just press down on Silver Creek, Colorado. It crawled inside your lungs and made a home there. It turned the earth to powder and the sky to white brass. And it made people do things they'd regret come autumn when the rains finally arrived and washed the blood away. Caleb Thornton had been walking for 3 days straight when he heard the voice. He'd learned not to stop. Not for towns, not for people, not for anything that might remind him he used to be the kind of man who helped. 4 years ago, he'd been a surgeon. Before that, a husband, a father. Now he was just boot leather and scar tissue, drifting through territories that didn't ask questions as long as you kept moving. The voice cut through the cicada hum like a knife through canvas. "Please, somebody!" It was small, young, desperate in the way only children get when they've run out of options adults pretend still exist. Caleb stopped on the rocky ridge overlooking the valley. Below him, heat shimmered off the hardpan in waves that made the landscape look like it was breathing. A farmhouse sat alone in the middle of nowhere. Weathered clapboard, sagging porch, garden gone to weeds. The kind of place people ended up when everywhere else had finished with them. The child was maybe 50 yards from the house, on her knees in the dirt. She was dragging something. Someone. Caleb's hand went to the brim of his hat, pulling it lower. "Not your problem. Keep walking." The mantra that had kept him alive and alone for 4 years hummed beneath his skull like a prayer he no longer believed in. But his boots didn't move. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. Barefoot, dress faded to no particular color, dark hair stuck to her neck with sweat. She had her hands hooked under the arms of an old man, gray-bearded, bleeding from somewhere Caleb couldn't see from this distance. And she was pulling with everything she had. The old man wasn't helping, either unconscious or dead. The girl stopped, panting. Looked up at the sky like she was asking it a question. Then she looked directly at Caleb. He was 200 yards away, half hidden by scrub pine and shadow. She shouldn't have been able to see him, but she stared right at him, and even across the distance, even through the heat haze, Caleb felt the weight of that gaze like a hand on his chest. Then she went back to pulling. "Damn it," Caleb muttered. He started down the slope before he could talk himself out of it. By the time he reached her, the girl had managed to drag the old man another 10 feet. Her hands were torn, dirt and blood mixing in the creases of her palms. She didn't look up when Caleb's shadow fell over her, just kept pulling. "Let me," Caleb said quietly. She stopped, sat back on her heels, looked up at him with eyes that were too old for her face, dark, steady, unsurprised. "I knew you'd come," she said. Caleb crouched down, checking the old man's pulse. Faint, but there. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, maybe 6 hours old. Infection already setting in around the edges. Whoever had done this hadn't cared whether the man lived or died, just wanted him gone. "What's your name?" Caleb asked, already working his hands under the man's shoulders. "Hope." "Hope what?" "Hope Weston." "This your grandfather?" "That's Ezra. He's Mama's friend." Caleb lifted the old man with practiced ease, muscle memory from a life he'd tried to bury. The man groaned but didn't wake. "Where's your mama?" "Inside, she's sick." "She know you're out here?" "No, sir." Caleb looked toward the farmhouse. The front door was closed. No movement in the windows. The whole place had the feel of something holding its breath. What happened to him? Hope stood, wiping her hands on her dress. It didn't help. Bad men came. They wanted Mama to sign papers. Ezra told them no, so they shot him and left him in the field. She said it the way another child might talk about the weather. Caleb adjusted his grip on the old man, felt the dead weight of him, the fever heat already radiating through torn cloth. How long ago? This morning, before the sun got high. Hours then. In this heat, with a wound like that, the man should already be dead. Caleb started walking toward the house. Hope fell into step beside him, her bare feet soundless in the dust. "Mama's going to point the shotgun at you," Hope said matter-of-factly. "Probably smart. She won't shoot unless you give her reason." "That's comforting." Hope looked up at him, and for just a moment something shifted in her expression, something that made Caleb's skin prickle despite the heat. "You won't give her reason. You stopped running for a purpose." Caleb's step faltered. "What did you say?" But Hope was already ahead of him, climbing the porch steps with the easy confidence of someone walking into a future they'd already seen. The door opened before they reached it. The woman standing in the doorway was maybe 30, maybe older. Hard to tell when life had worn the softness off someone. Dark hair pulled back severe, skin the color of summer earth, eyes black as gun barrels and twice as steady. She had Cherokee blood in her. Caleb could see it in the bones of her face, the way she stood like she'd grown up from the ground itself. She also had a shotgun pointed directly at his chest. "Drop him," she said. Her voice was rough, like she'd been coughing, or crying, or both. Caleb stopped at the base of the steps. Didn't drop the old man. Didn't reach for the pistol at his hip either. Just stood there, holding a dying man in the blinding white heat of midday, and met her eyes without flinching. "Name's Caleb Thornton. Your daughter found this man in the field. He's been shot. He'll die if you don't let me help him." "Mama, it's okay," Hope said from beside her mother. "He's the one I told you about." The woman, Clara, he assumed, didn't lower the gun. But something flickered across her face. Confusion. Fear. Something else Caleb couldn't name. "What one?" Clara asked, not taking her eyes off Caleb. "The one from my dream. 3 nights ago. I told you a man with sad eyes would come when we needed him most." Clara's jaw tightened. The shotgun wavered, just barely. "Dreams don't mean anything." "They do when I have them." Silence. The cicadas screamed. Somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out, sharp and lonesome. Caleb watched emotions war across Clara's face. Suspicion, desperation, exhaustion. She was sick. He could see it now. Fever-bright eyes, tremor in her hands. Whatever was wrong with her, she'd been fighting it for days, maybe weeks. Finally, she lowered the gun. Just a few inches. "You a doctor?" "Was, long time ago." "You sober?" "Right now, yes." Her mouth twisted. Almost a smile. Almost. "That'll have to do. Bring him inside." The interior of the house was dim and stifling, curtains drawn against the heat. It smelled like sickness and old smoke, coffee gone bitter, the ghost of meals that had stretched too long between. One room served as everything: kitchen, sitting area, sleeping space. A narrow door led to what might have been a bedroom. Everything was worn but clean, the kind of clean that came from pride when money had run out. "Table," Clara said, gesturing with the shotgun she hadn't quite let go of. Caleb laid Ezra out on the rough-hewn table, already assessing. The wound was worse up close. Entry point high on the shoulder, no exit wound. Bullet still lodged in there, infection spreading its dark fingers through the surrounding tissue. "I'll need hot water, clean cloth. Whiskey if you have it. Knife?" Clara set the shotgun aside, within reach, Caleb noted, and moved to the stove. Her movements were careful, deliberate, fighting through pain or weakness. "Hope, get the good linens from the trunk. The ones with the blue edges. I know, Mama." Hope disappeared through the narrow door. Clara worked in silence, stoking the fire, setting water to boil. Caleb watched her move through the space with an efficiency that spoke of too many emergencies, too many times being the only adult who could hold things together. "You got a name for what's wrong with you?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him. "Nothing that concerns you." "Fever, tremor in your hands, the cough I heard when you opened the door. That's pneumonia, ma'am. You're about 3 days from serious trouble if you don't rest." "I'll rest when there's time." She set the pot on the stove with more force than necessary. "How'd you happen to be passing by?" "Wasn't passing by. Was leaving." "Leaving what?" "Everywhere." That made her look at him. Really look, taking in the trail dust, the hollow places under his eyes, The way he held himself like a man who'd learned to take up as little space as possible in the world. You running from something or toward something? Neither, just running. Hope returned with the linens before Clara could respond. The cloth was old but pristine, edges embroidered in faded blue thread. The kind of thing that had mattered to someone once. Clara took them, met Caleb's eyes for just a moment. These were my wedding linens, she said quietly. All I have left that's fine enough for this kind of work. Don't waste them. It wasn't a threat. It was something more complicated. An offering, a test, a plea, all wrapped up in simple words. Caleb nodded. I won't. Try it. The surgery took 2 hours. Caleb worked in the terrible heat of the closed-up house, sweat dripping into his eyes, hands steady despite the years since he'd done this. Clara boiled instruments, passed him what he needed when he needed it, asked no questions. Hope sat in the corner, watching everything with those 2 old eyes. The bullet came out in pieces. Whoever had shot Ezra had used cheap ammunition that shattered on impact. Caleb cleaned the wound as best he could, packed it with whiskey-soaked cloth, stitched the old man back together with thread Clara produced from somewhere. When it was done, Ezra was still unconscious but breathing easier, the fever already starting to break. Caleb washed his hands in the basin Clara provided, watching rust-colored water swirl in patterns that reminded him of other surgeries, other desperate moments when he'd fought death to a draw. His hands were shaking now. Aftermath. Always came after. He'll live? Clara asked. If infection doesn't set in. If he rests. If he's strong enough. Caleb dried his hands on a scrap of cloth that had probably been fine once. He's old. That works against him. He's tougher than he looks. He'd have to be. Silence settled between them. Hope had fallen asleep in her corner, head pillowed on her arms. Clara looked at her daughter with an expression Caleb recognized. Love mixed with fear, the terrible knowledge that you couldn't protect someone from the world, no matter how hard you tried. Thank you, Clara said finally, for stopping, for helping. Caleb shook his head. Was on my way out when I heard your daughter. Wasn't planning on getting involved. But you did anyway. Bad habit. Seems like a good one to me. Caleb looked at her properly then, seeing past the shotgun and suspicion to the woman underneath. Strong jaw, full mouth pressed into a hard line by circumstances. The kind of beautiful that didn't need softness to justify itself. She met his gaze without flinching, and he felt something shift in his chest, the first crack in ice he'd spent 4 years building. He looked away first. Your daughter said bad men came. Said they wanted you to sign papers. Clara's expression shuddered immediately. That's none of your concern. Men who shoot old men and leave them to die in the sun make it my concern. Why? You're just passing through. Was. Past tense. And now? Caleb looked at Hope, still sleeping, her small hands curled into fists, even in rest. Now I'm wondering what a child has to dream about, to know a stranger's coming 3 days before he arrives. Clara stiffened. For a moment, Caleb thought she'd pick up the shotgun again. Instead, she pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, like the weight of standing had finally become too much. My daughter sees things, she said quietly, things that haven't happened yet, things that shouldn't be possible to know. She looked at Caleb with eyes that dared him to mock her. You think I'm crazy? No, ma'am, I've seen enough in this world to know there's more to it than what makes sense. Most people hear that and run the other way. I'm not most people. No. Clara studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away again. I don't think you are. Ezra groaned on the table. Clara moved to check on him, her hand gentle on his fever-warm forehead. When she looked back at Caleb, something had shifted in her face, a decision made. The men who did this work for Harlan Crestwood. He owns the bank in Silver Creek, owns half the businesses, owns the sheriff if it comes down to it. He's been trying to buy this land for 2 years. I keep saying no. He keeps making it harder to say no. Why does he want it? Water rights. Creek that runs through my back 40 feeds half the valley during dry season. Control that, you control everything downstream. Crestwood wants to build a dam, sell water to the mining operations up north. He'd make a fortune. I'd lose everything. So he's trying to force you out. Trying and succeeding. My husband died 8 months ago. Accident at the well, they said. But Ezra thinks... Her voice caught. She took a breath, steadied herself. Ezra thinks it wasn't an accident. Thinks Crestwood had him killed and made it look like bad luck. Caleb felt cold despite the heat. You believe him? I don't know what I believe anymore. All I know is my husband's dead, I'm sick, my daughter's having visions, and men with guns show up on my property trying to take the only thing I have left. She met his eyes. So yes, Mr. Thornton, I believe my life is in danger. I believe my daughter's life is in danger. I believe if I don't sign those papers, Crestwood will find a way to take this land over my dead body. Then why not just leave? Take your daughter and go. Clara's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. Go where? I'm half Cherokee, in case you hadn't noticed. My husband's family disowned me when we married. My own people don't claim me because I married white. This land is all I have. It's all Hope has. I won't let them take it without a fight. Before Caleb could respond, Hope stirred in her corner, sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. When she looked at Caleb, she smiled, small and sad and certain. You're going to stay, she said. Not a question. Caleb shook his head. I should leave at dawn. This isn't my fight. But you won't. Hope stood, walked over to him with that strange adult composure. I saw it. 3 nights ago and again last night. You stay. Bad things come. But good things too. We need you. Hope that's enough, Clara said gently. Mr. Thornton has his own life. He doesn't. Hope kept her eyes on Caleb. He lost it 4 years ago. He's been walking ever since, trying to get far enough away that it stops hurting. But it won't. Not until he stops running and does the thing he came here to do. The air went out of Caleb's lungs. He stared at this child who couldn't possibly know what she was saying, whose eyes held knowledge no 7-year-old should carry. What thing? He managed. Save us. Like you couldn't save them. The world tilted. Caleb gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, because if he didn't hold on to something solid, he was going to come apart right there in front of these strangers, who somehow weren't strangers at all. Clara stood quickly. Hope, go check the chickens. But, Mama, now. Hope hesitated, then nodded. She touched Caleb's hand briefly, her fingers small and warm and real, before slipping out the door into the dying light. When she was gone, Clara turned to Caleb. Her face was careful, neutral. I'm sorry, she doesn't mean to... Whatever she said, she's just a child. She doesn't understand... 4 years ago, Caleb heard himself say, I was working a mining camp up in Montana, surgeon for the company. My wife and daughter came to visit. There was a cave-in, 40 men trapped. I tried to save them. Spent 16 hours pulling bodies out, operating on people who were already dead. I was so focused on the men I didn't notice the secondary collapse warnings. Didn't see the support beams cracking. By the time I got back to the surface, the whole ridge had come down. He stopped, breathed, continued. My wife and daughter were in the company housing at the base of the ridge. They didn't have time to run. I pulled them both out myself. Too late. Couldn't save the men, couldn't save my own family, so I walked away. From the job, from Montana, from everything. Been walking ever since. Silence. Clara didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. Your daughter shouldn't be able to know that, Caleb said. Nobody knows that. I never told anyone. She sees things, Clara said quietly. True things. Things that hurt. She can't control it, can't turn it off. It just comes to her in dreams, in visions, ever since she was 3 years old. That's a hell of a burden for a child. It is, which is why I don't let people use her or fear her or treat her like she's something unnatural. She's my daughter. She's good, and she's kind, and she's special. And she sees you clearly, Mr. Thornton. She sees you're good too, even if you've spent 4 years trying to convince yourself otherwise. Caleb looked at the woman standing in her worn kitchen, fever-bright and fierce, defending a daughter the world wouldn't understand. Something in his chest loosened, just a fraction, just enough to hurt. I'm not good, he said. I'm just tired. Then rest here. For tonight at least. Ezra needs watching. I need sleep. And tomorrow, if you still want to leave, I won't stop you. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even really a request. It was just the truth, offered plainly, the way water is offered to someone dying of thirst. Caleb nodded. One night. Clara smiled, small and sad, an echo of her daughter's expression. One night. Darkness came slow and thick. Caleb sat on the porch while Clara slept, and Hope tended Ezra with a gentleness that made his throat tight. The girl moved around the old man with practiced ease, changing bandages, offering water, humming something low and wordless. He's dreaming, she said at one point, not looking at Caleb, about when he was young, before the war. He was happy then. How do you know? I can see it sometimes. When people dream loud enough. Caleb didn't ask what that meant. Wasn't sure he wanted to know. Around midnight, Ezra woke. His eyes opened, pale blue, sharp despite the pain and fever, and locked on Caleb immediately. You're the surgeon, he said, voice like gravel and rust. Was. Clara said you saved me. Clara's daughter found you. I just kept you from bleeding out. Ezra tried to sit up. Caleb moved to help him, propping the old man against the wall with surprising gentleness. Hope appeared with water, which Ezra drank in careful sips. Thank you, Ezra said finally. Both of you. Don't thank me yet. You're not out of danger. Never have been. Won't start worrying about it now. Ezra studied Caleb with those sharp eyes. You're the one Hope saw. The drifter with the surgeon's hands and the dead man's walk. She say all that? Didn't have to. I've known that girl since she was born. When she says someone's coming, someone comes. When she says they matter, they do. He paused, wincing. You planning to stay? Through tonight. Then I'm gone. No, you're not. Old man, I appreciate the confidence, but you don't know me. Know enough. You saved me even though it wasn't your problem. That says something about a man. Ezra's expression hardened. And if you're still here, it means you want to know the truth about what happened to Clara's husband. Caleb went still. She said it was an accident. She tells herself that because the alternative is too much to carry alone. But it wasn't an accident. Samuel Weston was murdered. And I can prove it. How? Ezra glanced toward the door where Hope stood silhouette against the lamplight. Not with the child here. Tomorrow. When Clara's stronger. Then I'll show you both what I found buried under the barn floor. Evidence that'll burn Harlan Crestwood's empire to ash. Before Caleb could respond, Hope spoke from the doorway. Someone's coming. Both men froze. Outside, the night had gone quiet. No crickets, no owl call, nothing but wind through dry grass. How many? Ezra asked. Hope closed her eyes. 3. On horses. They'll be here in 5 minutes. Caleb was already moving, checking his pistol, moving to the window. Crestwood's men? Worse, Ezra said grimly. If they're coming at night, they're not here to talk. Clara appeared in the bedroom doorway, shotgun in hand, face pale but set. She'd heard everything. Hope, get in the root cellar, now. Mama, now. For once, Hope didn't argue. She kissed her mother's cheek, looked at Caleb with those knowing eyes, and disappeared through the kitchen floor where Clara lifted a concealed door. You can still leave, Clara said to Caleb. Out the back. They don't know you're here. Caleb checked his ammunition. 6 rounds. He'd make them count. Told you I'd stay through the night. Night's not over yet. Clara smiled, fierce and terrible and beautiful. Then I guess we're about to find out what you're really running from, Mr. Thornton. Outside, hoofbeats drummed closer through the darkness, and Caleb Thornton, who'd spent 4 years running from everything that mattered, positioned himself by the window and finally stood his ground. Bas. The riders came in hard, silhouettes against starlight. 3 men, just like Hope had said. They didn't bother with subtlety, pulled up in front of the house with a scatter of gravel and dust, horses blowing hard from the ride. The leader dismounted first. Tall, heavy through the shoulders, face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. When he spoke, his voice carried the lazy confidence of a man who'd never been told no and meant it. Clara Weston, come on out now. We got business to settle. Clara stood just inside the door, shotgun barrel resting against the frame. Caleb positioned himself to the side, out of direct line of sight. Ezra had pulled himself to a sitting position, a pistol Caleb hadn't known he had balanced on his knee. "State your business and ride on," Clara called out. "You're not welcome here." "Not welcome? That's a hell of a thing to say to men trying to help you out of a bad situation," the leader spat into the dust. "Mr. Crestwood sent us."
"Heard there was some trouble here today. Came to check you were all right." "We're fine. You can tell Crestwood I said so." "See, that's the thing. We can't just take your word for it. Need to come inside, make sure everything's proper." "No." One of the other riders laughed, high and mean. "Woman doesn't know when she's beat. This is getting tedious." The leader held up a hand. Now, no need for unpleasantness. Mrs. Weston, we know the old man's in there. We know he's been saying things, dangerous things, things that could get a person hurt if they're not careful about who they tell." Clara's knuckles went white on the shotgun. "Ezra's recovering from a bullet wound. A bullet one of you likely put in him. I think he's said enough. That wound was regrettable, a misunderstanding. But see, that's what happens when people don't cooperate. Things get confused. People get hurt." The leader took a step closer. "Mister, Crestwood wants to be clear. He's offering you a fair price for this land. More than fair, considering your circumstances. Widow woman, sick child, no man to protect you. Dangerous times, accidents happen." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caleb moved, quiet. One step brought him parallel with the door. He caught Clara's eye, gave the slightest shake of his head. "Not yet." "I'm not selling," Clara said. "Not to Crestwood. Not to anyone. This land belonged to my husband. It belongs to my daughter now. You can tell your employer that." The silence that followed felt like drawn wire. Then the leader sighed. "Boys, I think Mrs. Weston needs a demonstration of how serious Mr. Crestwood is about this opportunity." The two other riders dismounted. One headed toward the barn. The other pulled something from his saddlebag. A torch. "Now hold on," the leader said conversationally. "We're not going to burn the house. Mr. Crestwood wants the land, not ash. But that barn there? That's just lumber. And lumber burns real easy on a hot summer night like this." "You touch that barn and I'll kill you," Clara said. Her voice didn't shake. The man with the torch smiled. "With what? That old shotgun? You get one of us, maybe two if you're lucky and we're stupid. But there's three of us and one of you. Math doesn't work in your favor, Mrs. Weston." That's when Caleb stepped into the doorway. The appearance of a second gun changed mathematics instantly. The leader's hand dropped toward his pistol, then froze when he registered the cold certainty in Caleb's eyes. The look of a man who'd already decided killing was an acceptable option and was just waiting for an excuse. "Evening," Caleb said quietly. "Seems like you boys made a miscalculation." The leader's jaw worked. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone passing through who doesn't take kindly to men threatening women and children." "This isn't your concern, Drifter. You made it my concern when you rode up here in the dark with torches and threats." Caleb's voice never rose above conversational. That made it more frightening. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to get back on your horses. You're going to ride back to Crestwood. And you're going to tell him that this land isn't for sale. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. And if we don't, then I start shooting, and I don't miss." The man with the torch laughed. "You're one man with a pistol. We're three. You feeling that confident?" A new voice cut through the tension. "Make that two men, and I might be old and shot up, but I can still put a bullet through your eye at 30 yards. Ezra stood in the doorway behind Clara, pale as paper, but steady as stone, his pistol aimed at the leader's chest. The mathematics changed again. The leader stared at them. Two armed men and a woman with a shotgun, all of them with the look of people who'd already lost too much to be scared of losing more. He was smart enough to recognize when a situation had turned against him. "This isn't over," he said finally. "It is for tonight," Caleb replied. "Now ride." For a long moment, it could have gone either way. Then the leader gestured to his men, who mounted up with the grudging slowness of people trying to save face. The one with the torch threw it to the ground and stomped it out with deliberate menace before swinging into his saddle.
Mr. Crestwood's going to hear about this, the leader said, about the drifter with the gun and the big mouth. He's going to want to know who you are. Tell him I'm nobody, and that nobody just told his hired thugs to go to hell. The leader's face hardened. You just made a real bad enemy, mister. Won't be my first, probably won't be my last. The riders turned their horses and rode out hard, disappearing into darkness with the same dramatic flair they'd arrived with. The sound of hoofbeats faded. Silence reclaimed the night. Clara lowered the shotgun slowly. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb holstered his pistol. Don't thank me yet. I just made your situation a hell of a lot worse. No, Ezra said from behind them. He was leaning heavily against the doorframe, but his voice was firm. You made it complicated. And complicated is better than simple, when simple means rolling over and dying. They'll be back, Caleb said, with more men, more threats, maybe worse. Then we'll be ready. Clara met his eyes. Or will you be gone by then? It was the question Caleb had been asking himself since the moment he'd heard Hope's voice calling for help. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. These weren't his people. This wasn't his fight. He'd already lost everything once and couldn't survive losing again. But he looked at Clara, brave and exhausted and refusing to break. At Ezra, old and wounded and still standing. At the root cellar where a 7-year-old girl with impossible eyes was hiding in the dark, believing in a future she'd seen in dreams. One more night, Caleb heard himself say. Then we'll see. Clara's smile was small and sad and grateful all at once. One more night. They spent the hours before dawn in careful preparation. Ezra, despite his wound, directed them to the barn where he'd hidden the evidence under a loose board in the floor. Clara brought lantern light while Caleb pried up the wood with hands that remembered this kind of work. Careful, methodical, searching for truth in hidden places. The documents were wrapped in oilcloth, protected from moisture and time. Caleb spread them out on the barn floor while Clara held the lantern close. Ledgers. Correspondence. Contracts signed in blood-dark ink. Evidence of a conspiracy that went deeper than simple land acquisition. Crestwood had been systematically buying up water rights across the territory for 3 years. Every property that refused to sell experienced the same pattern: accidents, illness, mysterious fires, bodies found in wells or at the bottom of cliff faces. The local sheriff had investigated exactly none of them. The territorial governor had received substantial donations from Crestwood's banking empire, and there, in careful script on a letter dated 8 months ago, was an order. The Weston property must be acquired by any means necessary. The husband is the obstacle. Remove him. Clara made a sound, half gasp, half sob. Her hand went to her mouth. I'm sorry, Ezra said quietly. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I needed to be sure. Needed proof that would stand up if we ever got the chance to bring it to someone who'd listen. He killed Samuel. Claire's voice was hollow. He killed my husband for water. For money. Caleb studied the documents with the cold assessment of someone who'd seen human nature at its worst. This is enough to hang Crestwood, maybe more, but getting it to someone who'll act on it, that's the problem. He owns the sheriff, probably owns the judge too. Then we take it to the territorial capital, Clara said, to the federal marshal, to someone beyond Crestwood's reach. That's a 3-day ride, through territory Crestwood controls, with you sick, Ezra wounded, and Hope. Caleb stopped. We'd never make it. Then what do we do? Clara looked at him with desperate hope. Because I am not letting that man get away with murdering my husband. I am not letting him take this land. I am not... She broke off, coughing, deep and wet and wrong. The fever that had been simmering all day flared higher. She swayed. Caleb caught her before she fell. She was burning up, skin hot to touch even through her dress. That's it. You're going to bed. Now. The evidence will still be here in the morning. You won't be any good to your daughter dead. Clara tried to argue, but didn't have the strength. Caleb half carried her back to the house, where Hope emerged from the root cellar like a ghost in the lantern light. Mama needs medicine, she said. The kind with the bitter smell. 3rd jar on the shelf. Caleb found it. Herbs and alcohol, something Clara had made herself. He helped her drink it while Hope pulled blankets close and whispered reassurances in her mother's ear. When Clara finally slept, Hope looked up at Caleb with those ancient eyes. "You're going to leave tomorrow. That's what you're thinking." It wasn't a question. Caleb sat down heavily, exhaustion finally catching up. "I'm thinking I brought you nothing but trouble. Those men wouldn't have come tonight if I hadn't been here. They would have come anyway. Maybe burned the barn. Maybe worse." Hope climbed up to sit beside him, small and solemn. "You being here saved us, just like I knew you would." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see it. Not all of it. Not everything. But I see the important parts. And you're important, Mr. Thornton. More than you know." "I'm nobody, Hope. Just a man who couldn't save the people who mattered most." "You couldn't save them because it wasn't your fault." She said it with such certainty that Caleb felt something crack inside him. "You think you could have stopped that mountain from falling? You think you should have known, should have seen it coming? But that's not how it works. Bad things happen. People die. And sometimes there's nothing anyone can do about it except survive and keep going." "I've been running for 4 years. That's not surviving. That's just existing. Until now." Hope reached out, took his hand in both of hers. "Now you stopped. Now you're here. Now you have a chance to save someone instead of just remembering who you couldn't save." Caleb looked at this child who spoke like a prophet, who'd seen his coming before he knew he was coming, who believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. "What if I fail again?" he whispered. "Then you fail trying. That's better than dying without trying at all." Dawn came too soon, and not soon enough. Caleb woke on the porch where he'd finally dozed off, watching the sun turn the eastern sky from black to gray to gold. His body ached, old injuries, new tension, the accumulated weight of 4 years sleeping rough. Inside he could hear movement, Clara coughing, Hope's small voice offering comfort, Ezra groaning as he shifted on the table that served as his sickbed. Caleb stood, stretched, checked his pistol. 6 rounds. Same as last night. Same as it would be if Crestwood's men came back today. The thought should have sent him running, should have had him saddling the horse he didn't have and disappearing into the morning before anyone could ask him to stay longer. Instead, he walked inside. Clara sat at the table, pale but upright, steam rising from a cup of coffee she held with both hands. Hope sat beside her, braiding something small from grass stems. Ezra was awake, fever-bright but coherent. They all looked at Caleb when he entered, waiting. "The evidence," Caleb said without preamble. "Can it be copied?" Ezra nodded slowly. "Why?" "Because we're not writing to the territorial capital. We're bringing the territorial capital here." Clara frowned. "How?" "There's a journalist who works for the Denver Post, Adelaide Shaw, made a name for herself exposing corruption in the mining companies up north. If anyone can get this story told, she can." Caleb poured himself coffee, the plan forming as he spoke. "We get the evidence to her. She verifies it, publishes it, sends copies to every newspaper in the territory. Once it's public, Crestwood can't hide behind bought officials. The federal government will have to act." "That's a long shot," Ezra said. "It's the only shot we have. Unless you've got a better idea." Silence. Then Clara spoke. "How do we reach her?" "Telegraph office in Silver Creek, send a message, arrange a meeting. She comes here, sees the evidence firsthand, interviews you both. Makes it real." "Crestwood owns the telegraph operator," Clara said flatly. "Then we send someone he doesn't know. Someone who can slip in and out without drawing attention." "Who?" Caleb met her eyes. "Me. You said you were nobody, that Crestwood's men wouldn't know you. They won't. Not yet. By the time they figure out who I am, the message will already be sent." Hope looked up from her braiding. "It won't work," she said quietly. Everyone turned to her. She kept her eyes down, fingers working the grass stems with mechanical precision. "What do you mean?" Clara asked gently. "I mean, he sees you coming. In my dream last night, I saw—" She stopped, swallowed. "I saw a man, tall, wearing black. He has a scar here." She touched her own cheek. "He knows you. He's been waiting for you." Caleb's blood went cold. "Describe him." Tall, thin, eyes like a snake. He smiles when he hurts people. And he knows you, Mr. Thornton. He's been looking for you for a long time. The coffee cup slipped from Caleb's hand, shattered on the floor. He didn't notice, because he knew exactly who Hope was describing. Silas Kane, the man who'd manipulated him 4 years ago. The man whose lies had sent Caleb to that mining camp in Montana. The man who'd indirectly caused the death of everyone Caleb had ever loved. And he was here, working for Crestwood, waiting. Caleb? Clara's voice seemed to come from very far away. Who is she talking about? Caleb looked at his hands. They were shaking. For the first time in 4 years, he let himself remember the face he'd spent so long trying to forget. His name is Silas Kane, he said quietly. And if he's here, then this isn't just about your land anymore. This is about finishing something that started a long time ago. What thing? Ezra asked. Caleb met Hope's eyes. She nodded slightly, as if confirming something she'd already known. Revenge, Caleb said. His against me, mine against him. And your family is standing right in the middle of it. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, promising heat and dust and violence. And somewhere in Silver Creek, a man in black smiled and waited for a ghost to finally stop running. The silence that followed Caleb's admission stretched like wire ready to snap. Clara stood slowly, coffee forgotten, her fever-bright eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to look away. Explain, she said. Not a request. Caleb bent to pick up the shattered cup pieces, buying himself seconds to organize thoughts he'd spent 4 years burying. When he straightened, Hope was watching him with that too-knowing gaze, and Ezra had shifted on the table to get a better view, pain etched in the lines around his mouth, but attention sharp as broken glass. Silas Kane is an outlaw, Caleb began, each word feeling like pulling nails from old wood. Not the kind that robs banks or holds up stages, the kind that orchestrates things from the shadows. 5 years ago, he approached me in Denver, said he represented a mining consortium that needed a surgeon for a new operation in Montana, offered me triple the usual rate. I was young, ambitious, wanted to provide well for my family. He moved to the window, staring out at land that didn't belong to him but that he'd somehow become responsible for defending. What I didn't know was that the mine was illegal, built on disputed territory, using equipment stolen from legitimate operations. Kane needed someone respectable on site, a doctor with credentials, to give the whole thing legitimacy if questions were ever asked. I was the fool who signed on without looking deeper. What happened? Clara asked quietly. The territorial governor found out, sent investigators. Kane got wind of it before they arrived and arranged the cave-in to destroy evidence. 40 men died. My wife and daughter were there because I'd convinced them it was safe, that this was our future. His voice went flat. Kane disappeared before anyone could connect him to it. The mining company collapsed. I was the only official left standing, so I took the blame. Lost my license, my reputation, everything. But not your freedom, Ezra observed. No. The investigators concluded I'd been duped, not complicit, but that didn't bring anyone back. Caleb turned from the window. I've been running ever since. And Kane's been out there somewhere, pulling strings, using people, leaving bodies in his wake. If he's here, if he's working with Crestwood, then this is bigger than water rights, Clara finished. She sat down heavily, and Caleb saw the weight settling on her shoulders, the realization that her husband's death was connected to something vast and poisonous. What does Kane want? Money, power, control. Same as always. Caleb's jaw tightened. And probably to finish what he started with me. I'm the only loose end from Montana, the only one who can connect him to those deaths, if the right people start asking questions. Hope spoke for the first time since her vision. He wants you to come to him. That's why he's waiting in town. He knows you'll try to send the telegraph. He wants you to walk into his trap. Then I won't go, Caleb said immediately. We'll find another way. There is no other way. Clara's voice was rough with more than illness. You said it yourself. We need to get word to that journalist before Crestwood moves against us again. Today, tomorrow at the latest. We don't have time to ride to another town. I'll go, Ezra offered, trying to sit up fully and failing, his face going gray with pain. You can't stand without help, Caleb said flatly. You'd make it maybe half a mile. Then Clara, is burning with fever and can barely walk across the room, Caleb interrupted. No, we need another option. They sat in frustrated silence, the morning heat already building, turning the small house into an oven. Outside, chickens scratched in the dust. A hawk circled high overhead, patient and lethal. The world continuing like nothing was wrong, like three broken people and one child weren't trying to figure out how to fight an empire with nothing but evidence and desperation. I could go, Hope said. Absolutely not, Claire and Caleb said simultaneously. Hope looked at her mother with calm certainty. I'm 7. Nobody pays attention to 7-year-old girls. I could walk into town, go to the telegraph office, send the message, and walk back out. They wouldn't even notice me. Hope, no. Mama, I've been to town before. Mr. Chen at the general store knows me. Mrs. Patterson at the hotel always gives me candy. I know how to be invisible when I need to be. She's not wrong, Ezra said reluctantly. Child that age, especially a girl, nobody sees her as a threat. And Kane's looking for Caleb, not. I don't care, Clara cut him off. Her hands were shaking, fever or fear or both. I am not sending my daughter into that snake pit alone. Then don't send her alone, Caleb said slowly, an idea forming. Send her with me, but separately. I go in first, draw attention, make myself visible. While everyone's watching me, Hope slips into the telegraph office from the back, sends the message, gets out. We meet up outside town and ride back together. That's insane, Clara said. You just said Kane's waiting for you. You'd be walking straight into his hands. Maybe, but he won't expect me to bring a child, won't expect me to use myself as distraction while someone else completes the mission. And if things go wrong, Hope can still get away. She's small, fast, knows the town. She'd have a chance. I won't risk my daughter for this. You're already risking her. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. Crestwood's not going to stop. Those men will come back, probably tonight, probably with more guns. We can keep fighting them off, but eventually we'll lose. The only way to protect Hope is to bring Crestwood down. And the only way to do that is to get this evidence into the right hands. Clara looked at her daughter, who sat quiet and still, waiting for the adults to decide her fate. Hope, what do you see? In your visions, what happens? Hope closed her eyes. For a long moment she was silent, her small face concentrating. When she spoke, her voice was distant. I see Mr. Thornton walking into sunlight. I see the man in black smiling. I see fire, shouting, running, and then she opened her eyes. And then it gets confusing. Like looking through water, I can't see clearly what comes after. That's not exactly reassuring, Ezra muttered. But you don't see her hurt? Clara pressed. You don't see either of you not coming back? No, Mama. We come back. Different than we left, but we come back. Different. Caleb wondered what that meant. Wondered what kind of change a 7-year-old prophet could see in their futures. But time was slipping away, the sun climbing higher, and every minute they waited was a minute Crestwood could use to tighten the noose. We leave in an hour, he said. That gives me time to teach Hope exactly what to say at the telegraph office, where to run if things go wrong, how to signal me if she needs help. Caleb, Clara. He met her eyes, and for the first time since his family died, he let someone see past the walls he'd built. I know what it's like to lose a child. I know that fear. And I swear to you, on everything I have left, I will bring her back safe. Or I won't come back at all. The weight of that promise hung in the air between them. Clara studied his face for a long time, searching for something, truth, capability, trustworthiness. Whatever she found must have been enough, because she finally nodded. 1 hour, she said. And Caleb? If anything happens to her, it won't. But if it does, you make sure whoever caused it doesn't live to see sunset. It wasn't a request. It was a mother's pronouncement, hard and final, as judgment. Caleb nodded once, understanding the covenant he was entering. Ezra cleared his throat. While you two are playing hero, I'll copy the most damning documents. If something goes wrong, If Crestwood's men come here while you're gone, Clara can burn the originals. At least we'll still have duplicates hidden." "Where will you hide them?" Caleb asked. Ezra smiled grimly. "I've been hiding things from powerful men my whole life. They'll never find what I don't want found." The plan was thin, desperate, held together with hope and necessity, but it was all they had. Caleb spent the next hour drilling hope on every detail. The telegraph office opened at 8. She'd go in through the back alley where deliveries came. The operator's name was Morris, and he had a sweet tooth. Hope knew this from previous visits with her mother. She'd bring him the cookies Clara had been saving for a special occasion, smile sweetly, and ask to send a message to her aunt in Denver while he was distracted eating. "What if he asks why you're alone?" Caleb asked for the third time. "I say Mama's sick and asked me to come because she can't travel," Hope recited patiently, "and that I'm supposed to hurry back with medicine from Mr. Chen's store. And if he gets suspicious, I cry. Men don't know what to do when little girls cry. He'll send the message just to make me stop." Caleb couldn't help a small smile. "You've thought about this." "I see things, Mr. Thornton. I don't just see what happens. I see what people are like inside. Mr. Morris is lonely and kind. He'll help me." "And what about the man in black? What do you see in him?" Hope's expression went serious. "Emptiness. Like there's a hole where his heart should be, and he fills it by breaking other people's hearts. He's been broken a long time, Mr. Thornton. So long, he doesn't remember what it feels like to be whole." "Can he be reasoned with?" "No, but he can be survived." They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern hills, turning the world to gold and amber. Clara stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, watching them go with eyes that held too much fear and too much trust. Ezra had dragged himself to the window, his pale face a ghost behind the glass. Caleb rode a horse borrowed from Clara's small stable, an aging mare named Sage who'd seen better days but still had heart. Hope sat in front of him, small and straight-backed, her dark hair braided with the same precision she applied to everything. They didn't talk much on the ride. What was there to say? They were walking into danger together, a drifter and a child, carrying evidence that could topple an empire and a hope that someone would care enough to act on it. About a mile from Silver Creek, Caleb reined in. "This is where we separate. You remember the plan?" "Every word." "And if something goes wrong?" "I run to Mrs. Patterson's hotel. She has a root cellar. She'll hide me." Hope turned in the saddle to look up at him. "But nothing will go wrong. Not with you there." "I'm just one man, Hope. I can't protect you from everything." "I know, but you'll protect me from enough." She said it with such simple certainty that Caleb felt his throat tighten. "It's time. You need to go in first, be seen. I'll count to 200, then follow." Caleb dismounted, helped her down. For a moment they stood there in the morning heat, man and child, both carrying weight too heavy for their frames. "Hope," Caleb said quietly, "whatever happens in there, whatever you see or hear, you get that message sent and you get out. Don't wait for me, don't try to help, just run. I'll come back for you if I have to. You'll obey me if you know what's good for you." Hope smiled, small and sad and far too old. "You sound like my papa. He used to say that too. I didn't listen to him either." Before Caleb could respond, she darted forward and wrapped her arms around his waist in a quick, fierce hug. Then she was gone, melting into the scrub brush like smoke, leaving him standing alone on the road with a borrowed horse and a heart that hurt in ways he'd forgotten were possible. He mounted up and rode toward Silver Creek, toward Silas Kane, toward the reckoning he'd been running from for 4 years. Silver Creek in the morning looked almost respectable. Main Street ran straight as a rifle shot, lined with false front buildings that pretended to be bigger than they were. The bank stood at the center, 2 stories of brick and ambition, Harlan Crestwood's name etched above the door in letters that caught the sun like gold teeth. The saloon sat across from it, already serving breakfast whiskey to men who'd given up pretending they had anywhere better to be. Between them, the usual collection of shops and services that made up a frontier town: general store, hotel, blacksmith, undertaker. And the telegraph office, a small building squeezed between the assayer's office and a dress shop that catered to the kind of women who could afford to care about fashion this far from civilization. Caleb rode in slow, making himself visible, making himself available. He dismounted in front of the saloon, tied Sage to the rail with hands that didn't shake, even though everything inside him was screaming to run. He could feel eyes on him, townsfolk in windows, men on porches, the weight of attention that came with being a stranger in a place that didn't welcome strangers. He pushed through the saloon doors. The interior was dim after the bright morning, smelling of spilled beer and old tobacco and the particular desperation of men drinking before noon. A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward him, assessed, dismissed. He was nobody, just another drifter passing through. Caleb walked to the bar, ordered whiskey he didn't intend to drink. The bartender, balding, heavy-jowled, bored, poured without comment. "Looking for work," Caleb said casually. "Heard Crestwood's hiring." The bartender's expression didn't change. "Bank's across the street, but Crestwood don't hire drifters." "Even drifters with skills?" "What kind of skills?" "Medical, surgical. Figure a town this size could use a doctor who doesn't ask too many questions." That got attention. Two men at a corner table looked up with sudden interest. One of them stood, tall, lean, wearing black from hat to boots. The scar on his left cheek caught the lamplight like a second smile. Silas Kane crossed the room with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned every space he entered. Up close, he was younger than Caleb remembered. Maybe 40, maybe less, but his eyes were ancient and empty as abandoned wells. "A surgeon," Kane said softly. "How interesting. We don't get many of those passing through Silver Creek." He tilted his head, studying Caleb with the focus of a snake watching a mouse. "Do I know you?" "Don't think so. I have an excellent memory for faces, especially faces of people who've wronged me." The smile widened. "Or people I've wronged. Those faces tend to linger." Caleb met his gaze without flinching, even though every instinct screamed that this man recognized him, was playing with him the way a cat plays with something already dying. "Maybe I just have one of those faces." "Maybe," Kane gestured to the bartender. "Another glass. My friend and I need to talk about opportunities." The bartender poured. Kane picked up both glasses, handed one to Caleb. "To chance meetings." "To chance meetings?" They drank. The whiskey burned going down, tasting like rust and regret. Kane set his glass down with deliberate care, never taking his eyes off Caleb. "I'm curious," Kane said. "What brings a man with surgical skills to a nothing town like Silver Creek? Running from something or towards something?" "Just passing through." "Everyone's just passing through until they're not." Kane leaned against the bar, relaxed and dangerous. "Tell me something, friend. You ever work up Montana way? Mining camps maybe 4, 5 years back?" Caleb's blood went cold, but he kept his face neutral. "Worked a lot of places. Montana sounds familiar." "I thought so, because I remember you now, Dr. Caleb Thornton, the surgeon who couldn't save anyone when it mattered most." The saloon went quiet. Even the men who weren't paying attention before were paying attention now, sensing violence in the air like animals sensing weather change. "That was a long time ago," Caleb said carefully. 4 years. Not that long. Not long enough to forget. Kane's smile turned sharp. "I heard you lost everything in that cave-in. Wife, daughter, career. Shame, really. But accidents happen, especially around people who ask too many questions or start remembering things they shouldn't. Is there a point to this conversation?" "The point, Doctor, is that I'm surprised to see you here. In Silver Creek. On the same day that certain documents have gone missing. Documents that could cause a lot of trouble for a lot of important people if they fell into the wrong hands." Outside, a clock tower chimed. 8 times. The telegraph office was opening. Hope would be counting down, getting ready to move. Caleb needed to keep Kane talking, needed to keep every eye in this saloon focused on him and not on a 7-year-old girl slipping through back alleys. "I don't know anything about documents," Caleb said. "No? That's funny, because I heard you spent last night at the Weston farm, and I heard old Ezra's been hiding something out there, and I heard that Ezra got himself shot yesterday for being too curious about things that don't concern him." Kane's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Now here you are. The ghost from Montana, the man I've been expecting to see eventually, coming to town on the exact day we need to send a very important message about how dangerous curiosity can be. You're talking in riddles. Am I? Let me be clearer then. Kane straightened, his hand drifting toward the gun at his hip with casual menace. You're going to tell me where those documents are. You're going to tell me what the widow knows. And you're going to tell me who else might have copies. And then you're going to ride out of here and keep riding until you forget you ever heard the names Crestwood or Kane. And if I don't, then I'll burn that farm to the ground with everyone inside it. The sick woman, the crippled old man, the strange little girl who sees things she shouldn't. Kane's smile was a razor. I'm particularly curious about the girl. I've heard stories about a child who knows things before they happen. That kind of gift could be very useful to the right people. Rage flooded through Caleb like fire through dry timber. His hand moved toward his pistol before conscious thought caught up. Kane was faster. His gun cleared leather and leveled at Caleb's chest in one fluid motion. Don't. The saloon held its breath. Caleb froze, hand halfway to his weapon, knowing he was a half second from dying but not particularly caring in that moment. Here's what's going to happen, Kane said pleasantly. You're going to put both hands on the bar. You're going to tell me what I want to know. And then you're going to walk out of here and disappear. If you cooperate, I might even let the woman and child live. Might. Caleb's mind raced. Hope would be at the telegraph office by now. Would the operator be distracted by cookies? Would she remember what to say? How long did it take to send a message? 2 minutes? 5? How long did Caleb need to buy her? The documents are gone, he said, forcing his voice steady. Burned. Ezra destroyed them before he passed out from blood loss. Liar. It's the truth. We knew Crestwood would come for them, knew there was no way to get them out safely, so Ezra burned everything, nothing left but ash. Kane's eyes narrowed. And you expect me to believe the old man would destroy his leverage? The only thing keeping him alive? I expect you to believe he was dying and wanted to make sure you couldn't use that information to hurt anyone else. Caleb watched Kane's face for any sign of belief or doubt. Check the farm if you don't believe me. Search every inch. You won't find anything. For a long moment, Kane considered, then he smiled. All right, let's do that. Boys? 2 men stood from the corner table, the same men who'd ridden out to the farm last night. They moved to flank Caleb, hands on their weapons. We're all going to take a ride, Kane said, out to the Weston farm, and we're going to search it together. And if I find out you're lying, I'm going to make you watch while I burn it down with everyone inside, starting with the child. Caleb's blood turned to ice. If they rode out now, if they left town, Hope would come back to find him gone. She'd panic, maybe try to follow, maybe get caught in whatever violence was about to unfold. He needed to stall, needed to keep them here just a few more minutes. I need to send a message first, Caleb said. Let them know we're coming. Otherwise, Clara will shoot anyone who rides up. Nice try. We're leaving now. Then you'll ride into a shotgun blast, your choice. Kane's jaw tightened. He was weighing options, calculating risk. Finally, he gestured to one of his men. Take him to the telegraph office. Let him send his message, but if he tries anything... He won't, the man said, grabbing Caleb's arm. They walked out into blinding sunlight. Across the street, through the press of morning traffic, toward the small building where Hope should be right now, sending the message that would end this. Caleb's heart hammered. This wasn't the plan. This was disaster waiting to unfold. The telegraph office door stood open. Inside, he could see Morris, the operator behind his counter, glasses perched on his nose, working his key with the mechanical precision of long practice. He could also see Hope. She stood at the counter, tears streaming down her face, holding out coins with shaking hands. Please, sir, my mama said it's important. She said I have to send it today. And I told you, little miss, I can't send personal messages without proper authorization. Come back with your mother and... But she's sick. She can't come. Please. Caleb's captor shoved him through the door. Morris, we need to send a message. The operator looked up, saw Caleb, saw the gun in the other man's hand. His expression shuddered immediately. Of course, right away. Hope turned, saw Caleb, and her eyes went wide. For just a second, their gazes met. She was asking him a question. What do I do? Caleb gave the smallest shake of his head. Get out. But Hope didn't run. Instead, she stumbled forward, threw her arms around Caleb's waist, buried her face against his side, and sobbed. Mr. Thornton, thank goodness. This mean man won't help me send Mama's message. The performance was flawless, the tears real, the desperation palpable. Caleb's captor looked confused. You know this kid? Neighbor's daughter. I'm staying at the Weston farm. Caleb put his hand on Hope's head, felt her trembling. What message were you trying to send, Hope? To Aunt Adelaide in Denver, about medicine for Mama, but he won't. I'll handle it, Caleb said gently. He looked at Morris. Can you send a message for the child? I'll pay. Morris glanced at Caleb's captor, who shrugged. Make it quick. Thank you. Hope wiped her eyes, pulled out a carefully folded paper from her pocket. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. She handed it to Morris, who unfolded it and read. His eyebrows rose. This is going to the Denver Post. To a journalist. My aunt works there, Hope said quickly. Please, sir, it's important. Morris looked at the message again. Whatever he saw there made his face go pale. He glanced at Caleb, at the armed man, at Hope's tear-stained face. Some kind of calculation happened behind his eyes. Then he sat down and started tapping the key. Caleb held his breath. Beside him, his captor shifted impatiently, but didn't object. Hope stayed pressed against Caleb's side, her fingers clutching his shirt like a lifeline. The key clicked and clacked. Morris worked with agonizing slowness, or maybe time had just stopped meaning anything. Each tap felt like an eternity. Each pause between words stretched into forever. Finally, Morris stopped. Sent. You're sure? Hope asked. It went all the way to Denver? Confirmed receipt. Your aunt will get it within the hour. Hope's grip on Caleb's shirt loosened. Thank you, sir. She pulled away, looked up at Caleb with eyes that held triumph and terror in equal measure. The message was sent. Evidence was in motion. Whatever happened next, they'd done what they came to do. All right, touching reunion's over, Caleb's captor said. Time to go. But I need to get medicine for Mama, Hope protested. Kid, go home. Now. But now! Hope flinched, looked at Caleb one more time. He gave her the slightest nod. Go. Be safe. She ran. Out the door, into the street, disappearing into morning crowds like she'd never been there at all. Caleb watched her go and felt something in his chest unclench. She'd done it. She'd gotten the message out. Whatever happened to him now, it was worth it. Let's ride, his captor said, shoving him toward the door. They emerged into sunlight to find Silas Kane waiting with horses and 3 more armed men. His smile was cold as winter stone. Message sent? He asked pleasantly. To the farm, warning them we're coming. Of course. Kane mounted up with fluid grace, though I suspect that's not the only message that got sent this morning. Morris? The telegraph operator appeared in the doorway, looking sick. I'm sorry, Mr. Kane. The child, I know what she did. I've been watching through the window the entire time. Kane's gaze fixed on Caleb with terrible focus. Very clever, Doctor. Using the girl as your messenger while you played distraction. Almost worked, too. Caleb's stomach dropped. Almost? He managed. Kane pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the message Hope had given Morris. While you were all watching the emotional reunion, I had my man check Morris's transcriptions. He keeps copies of everything, you see. Bank policy. And this particular message is quite interesting. All about documents, murders, conspiracies, names and dates. Evidence of crimes. He refolded the paper carefully. Addressed to Adelaide Shaw, investigative journalist. It's already sent, Caleb said flatly. Oh, I know. But here's the thing about telegraph lines, Doctor. I own the relay station 20 miles north of here. Every message goes through there before continuing to Denver, and I have men at that station right now waiting to intercept anything suspicious. Kane tucked the paper away. Your message will never reach Denver, and that little girl just signed her mother's death warrant. You son of a... Caleb lunged. Kane's men grabbed him, drove him to his knees in the dust, a gun barrel pressed against the back of his skull, cold and final. Easy, Kane said mildly. I'm not going to kill you here. Too public. Too messy. No, we're going to ride out to the Weston farm nice and civilized. We're going to collect those documents. And then we're going to have a conversation about the price of betrayal. He leaned down from his saddle, his face close enough that Caleb could see his reflection in those empty eyes. You should have kept running, Doctor. Should have stayed a ghost. Now you're about to find out what happens to people who get in my way. They hauled Caleb to his feet, threw him on a horse, tied his hands to the saddle horn. 6 armed men surrounded him. The morning sun beat down like judgment. And somewhere ahead, racing across open country on a borrowed horse, Hope was riding hard for home with the news that would either save her mother or condemn them all. Caleb closed his eyes and prayed to a God he'd stopped believing in 4 years ago that the child had enough of a head start to warn Clara before Kane's men arrived. That prayer went unanswered. They spotted Hope when they were still 2 miles from the farm, a small figure on a large horse, pushing the animal hard across the flat approaches. She saw them too, tried to veer away, but there was nowhere to go. The land was open, exposed, offering no cover. Kane smiled. Well, this makes things simpler. He spurred his horse forward. The others followed. Hope kicked her mount desperately, but the old mare was tired and Hope was light in the saddle, not heavy enough to force real speed. They caught her within minutes. Kane reached down as they drew alongside, plucked Hope from her saddle like picking fruit from a tree. She screamed, the first time Caleb had heard her sound like an actual child, instead of a prophet, in small form. Let her go, Caleb shouted, fighting against the ropes that held him. Let her go. Kane settled Hope in front of him on his saddle, one arm around her waist holding her secure. Why would I do that? She's leverage, insurance, and possibly the most interesting thing to happen in this territory in months. He looked down at Hope's furious, terrified face. Hello, little prophet. I've been wanting to meet you. You're going to die screaming, Hope said with shocking venom. I've seen it. Kane's smile widened. Have you? Tell me more. Hope don't, Caleb warned. But Hope was past listening. She stared up at Kane with those knowing eyes and spoke with the certainty of someone reading from a book already written. Fire, blood, you begging for mercy you never gave, and a woman's face as you die. Not mine, not my mother's. Someone else. Someone you wronged long ago. She's the last thing you see before darkness takes you. For just a moment, something flickered in Kane's expression. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. Then it was gone, replaced by cold amusement. Children and their stories, he said lightly. But his grip on Hope tightened. Let's go see your mother, shall we? I'm sure she'll be thrilled we're all together again. They rode the last 2 miles in grim silence. Hope had stopped struggling, sat rigid in Kane's grip, her eyes distant like she was watching things the rest of them couldn't see. Caleb tried to catch her gaze, tried to offer some wordless reassurance, but she wouldn't look at him. The Weston farm appeared over the rise like a tombstone, small, weathered, standing alone against the vast sky. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was inside, waiting. Caleb's heart sank when he saw Claire on the porch. She stood with her shotgun raised, fever-bright and swaying but determined. Beside her, Ezra leaned against the doorframe with his pistol drawn despite the blood seeping through his bandages. They'd prepared for violence. They just hadn't prepared for this. Clara's face went white when she saw Hope. "Let her go!" she screamed across the distance. "Lower the gun first," Kane called back pleasantly. "Then we'll talk about letting people go." They stopped 50 yards from the house. Standoff distance. Close enough to talk, far enough to make shooting difficult. Kane's men spread out in a loose semicircle, creating a killing field with Clara and Ezra at its center. "This is simple," Kane said. "Give me the documents. All of them, including any copies. Do that, and everyone lives." Well, mostly everyone. I still need to have a conversation with the good doctor here about Montana. But your daughter goes free. You have my word. "Your word means nothing," Clara spat. "Perhaps, but it's all you've got." Kane's arm tightened around Hope, who made a small sound of pain. "The documents, now, or I start hurting the child." Clara's shotgun wavered, Behind her, Ezra straightened, his face set in hard lines. "They're gone," he called out. "Burned them last night. Nothing left." "Liar." "It's true. Check the stove. Check the barn. You won't find anything." Cain considered this. Then he pulled his pistol and pressed it against Hope's temple. "I don't believe you, and I'm done asking nicely." Time stopped. The world narrowed to that gun barrel against that small skull. The hammer pulled back, Cain's finger on the trigger. "Wait!" Clara screamed. "Wait! They're in the barn, under the floorboards. I'll show you." "Mama, no!" Hope started. "I'm not letting him hurt you, baby. Not for paper and ink." Clara lowered her shotgun slowly. "Let me show you. Let my daughter go, please." Cain smiled. "Now we're being reasonable. 2 of you, go with her. Find those documents, and if she tries anything, kill the old man." 2 men dismounted, grabbed Clara by the arms, hauled her toward the barn. She looked back at Hope once, her eyes saying everything words couldn't. "I'm sorry. I love you. Forgive me." Caleb watched them disappear into the barn and felt the trap closing. This was it, the end of the road. They'd fought and failed. All that was left now was damage control, maybe buying Hope enough time to run when chaos erupted. But Hope wasn't looking at the barn. She was looking east toward the road they'd just traveled, her eyes focusing on something none of the rest of them could see yet. "She's coming," Hope whispered. "Who?" Cain asked absently, most of his attention on the barn. "The woman from my vision. Sure, the one who's there when you die." Cain went still. "What did you say?" Hope turned in his grip to look up at him with terrible certainty. "I told you I see things, and I see her now. She's almost here, with help, with proof, with everything you tried to stop." A sound cut through the morning, hoofbeats, many of them, coming fast. Cain's men turned, hands dropping to weapons. From the east, a cloud of dust approached. Through it, figures took shape. Riders. At least a dozen of them. At the front, a woman in traveling clothes rode a black horse with absolute confidence. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the notebook strapped to her saddle, the camera equipment bouncing against her hip. Adelaide Shaw had come after all. And behind her, wearing badges that caught the morning sun, rode 6 federal marshals. Cain's face went from triumph to rage to something like despair in the space of a heartbeat. He looked down at Hope with dawning realization. "How?" "The relay station," Hope said simply. "The man who works there? His daughter is my friend. I visited her 3 days ago. I told her if a message came through for Adelaide Shaw, to make sure it got delivered no matter what anyone said. She promised." Hope smiled, small and sad and victorious. "You can't stop messages when people care about each other, Mr. Cain. You can only delay them." The riders thundered into the yard. Adelaide Shaw dismounted before her horse even stopped, her eyes taking in the scene with journalist precision. Caleb tied to his saddle, Hope held at gunpoint, armed men surrounding the farm. "Silas Cain," she said, and her voice carried like a judge passing sentence. "I've been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time." The lead marshal, gray-bearded and granite-faced, drew his weapon. "Release the child. Hands where I can see them. All of you." For one terrible moment, Caleb thought Cain would shoot anyway. Would kill Hope out of spite, out of rage, just to prove he still had power over something. Then Clara emerged from the barn, arms full of documents, her shotgun aimed directly at Cain's back. "You heard the man," she said quietly. "Let my daughter go." Cain looked around, at the marshals, at Adelaide with her notebook already open, at Clara with her finger on the trigger, at Caleb who met his gaze with cold promise of violence. He was surrounded, outnumbered, outmaneuvered by a child who saw futures he couldn't control. Slowly he lowered his gun. Slowly he released Hope. She slid from the saddle and ran to her mother, who caught her one-armed without ever taking her aim off Cain. The marshals moved in, weapons drawn, voices shouting orders. Cain's men threw down their guns. One tried to run and was tackled before he made it 10 yards. Through it all, Cain kept his eyes on Caleb. Even as marshals pulled him from his horse, even as they snapped iron cuffs around his wrists, he stared at the man who'd finally stopped running. "This isn't over, Thornton," he said. "Yes, it is," Caleb replied. "You're done. We both are." And for the first time in 4 years, Caleb felt the truth of those words settle into his bones like medicine, bitter and necessary, and finally, bringing something close to peace. Adelaide Shaw worked with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years documenting other people's ruins. She photographed everything: the documents spread across Clara's kitchen table, the bullet wound in Ezra's shoulder, the rope burns on Caleb's wrists where Cain's men had bound him. Her assistant, a young man named Thomas, who looked fresh out of university, took notes in cramped handwriting that filled page after page. The lead marshal, a man named Garrett, who'd seen enough frontier justice to know the difference between law and vengeance, interviewed each of them separately. Clara went first, her voice steady despite the fever that made her hands shake. She told him about Samuel's death, about the years of pressure from Crestwood, about the men who'd shot Ezra and threatened to burn her home. Ezra went next, propped up on the table that had served as his surgery site, his pale face set with determination. He laid out the conspiracy in careful detail: the pattern of deaths, the forged documents, the money trail that led from Silver Creek to Denver to territorial officials who'd looked the other way for the right price. When it was Caleb's turn, he sat across from Garrett in the small bedroom and told the truth he'd been running from for 4 years. The mining camp, the cave-in, Cain's manipulation, his wife and daughter buried under Montana stone. Garrett listened without judgment, his weathered face revealing nothing until Caleb finished. "You blame yourself," Garrett said. "It wasn't a question." "Wouldn't you?" "Probably. But blame doesn't change what happened, just poisons what comes after." The marshal closed his notebook. "Cain's going to trial. Federal court in Denver. We've got enough evidence to hang him 3 times over. You'll need to testify." "I'll be there." "Good. Because men like Cain, they're slippery. They've got money, connections, lawyers who know how to make juries forget what they're looking at. We need every witness we can get." Through the window, Caleb could see Hope sitting on the porch steps, braiding grass stems with fierce concentration. Adelaide had tried to interview her, but Clara had shut that down immediately. "She's 7 years old," Clara had said with quiet finality. "She's been through enough. You want her story? You'll get it through me." Adelaide hadn't argued. She just nodded and moved on to photographing the barn where the evidence had been hidden. The woman was relentless in a way Caleb recognized, the kind of focus that came from believing the truth mattered more than comfort or convenience. "What about Crestwood?" Caleb asked. Garrett's expression hardened. "He's already lawyered up, claiming he had no knowledge of Cain's activities, that Cain was operating independently. Says any documents with his name on them are forgeries." "That's a lie." "Of course it is, but he's rich and connected and sitting in his bank right now like nothing's wrong. Arresting him without ironclad proof means watching him walk free on a technicality." The marshal stood, his joints creaking. "Miss Shaw thinks she can crack that. Says once her story runs in the Denver Post, pressure will force the territorial governor to act. Public outrage, demands for investigation, that sort of thing. And if it doesn't work, then we build a case the old-fashioned way, slow, methodical, boring, following money and bodies until we've got something even Crestwood's lawyers can't explain away." Garrett moved to the door, then paused. "Doc, can I give you some advice? Can I stop you?" The ghost of a smile crossed the marshal's face. "You've been running for 4 years. Now you've stopped. That's good. But stopping's just the first step. At some point, you're going to need to figure out what you're running toward instead of what you're running from." He left before Caleb could respond. Through the thin walls, Caleb could hear Adelaide interviewing Clara in the kitchen. Her questions were precise, empathetic, designed to extract maximum truth with minimum trauma. "When did you first suspect your husband's death wasn't an accident? What did Crestwood's men say when they came to your property? How did you protect your daughter through all of this?" Clara answered each question with the same steady composure she'd shown while facing down armed men. But Caleb could hear the exhaustion underneath, the fever burning through her voice, turning words rough at the edges. He found himself moving toward the kitchen before he'd consciously decided to. Adelaide looked up as he entered, her sharp eyes assessing him the way she'd assessed everything else that morning, as material, as evidence, as story. "Dr. Thornton," she said, "I was hoping to speak with you next." "Later. Right now, Clara needs rest." "I'm fine," Clara protested, but the protest was weak,
her face flushed with more than heat. "You're burning with fever and you've been awake for 2 days straight," Caleb said flatly. "Miss Shaw can finish her interview when you're not about to collapse." Adelaide studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "He's right. I've got enough for now anyway." She closed her notebook with decisive finality. "Mrs. Weston, thank you. Your testimony is going to be crucial." "Will it be enough?" Clara asked. "To bring Crestwood down?" "Honestly, I don't know. Men like him have ways of insulating themselves from consequences. But I can promise you this, by the time my story runs, everyone in this territory will know what he did. And sometimes public shame accomplishes what the law can't." It wasn't the reassurance Clara wanted, but it was the truth. She nodded slowly, accepting it. Caleb helped her to the bedroom while Adelaide gathered her equipment. Hope appeared in the doorway as he was pulling blankets over her mother, her small face worried. "Is Mama going to be all right?" "She needs medicine and rest. The fever's worse." Caleb checked Clara's pulse. Too fast, too weak. "How long has she been sick like this?" 3 weeks, Hope said quietly. "Since the men first came. Since they told her about Papa's accident that wasn't an accident. She stopped sleeping after that, stopped eating right, got worse every day." Caleb looked at Clara, who'd already fallen into restless sleep, and felt anger rise in his chest. Not the hot rage of violence, but the cold fury of injustice. They'd killed her husband, and then slowly killed her too, one threat and sleepless night at a time. "I need to get medicine from town," he said. "Proper medicine, not just herbs. She needs antibiotics, fever reducers, something to help her breathe. That pneumonia is setting in deep." "I can go," Hope offered. "No, you're staying here where it's safe." "But Mr. Kane's arrested, his men too. There's nobody left to—" "Hope." Caleb crouched down to her eye level. "I know you're brave. I know you're capable of more than most adults twice your age. But you're also 7 years old, and you've been through more today than anyone should experience in a lifetime. So I'm asking you, please, stay here, watch your mother, let Marshal Garrett's men keep you safe. Let me do this one thing." Hope studied his face with those two knowing eyes, reading things he wasn't saying. "You're coming back, though. You're not using this as an excuse to leave." It wasn't a question. Caleb felt his throat tighten. "I'm coming back," he said, and meant it. The ride into Silver Creek felt different this time. No desperate urgency, no suicide mission, no child riding ahead toward danger. Just a man on a borrowed horse, heading into town to buy medicine for someone who'd become important when he wasn't looking. The streets were quieter than morning. Word had spread about the arrests, about the marshals, about Adelaide Shaw with her camera and notebook documenting everything. People watched from windows and doorways as Caleb passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to fear to something that might have been hope. The general store was run by a Chinese man named Chen, who'd seen enough frontier violence to recognize a man coming in peace. He sold Caleb quinine, willow bark extract, and a tincture for lung inflammation without asking questions. Only when Caleb was leaving did Chen speak. "The widow Weston. She's good woman. Husband was good man. They did not deserve this trouble." "No," Caleb agreed. "They didn't." "You a doctor? You can help her?" "I'm going to try." Chen nodded slowly. "Then I give you this also, no charge." He pressed a small cloth bag into Caleb's hand. "My grandmother's recipe. For fever and cough. Very old. Very effective. You brew it strong, add honey if you have. Make her drink 3 times each day." Caleb looked at the bag, then at Chen's weathered face. "Thank you. Thank me by keeping her alive. We need more people in this territory who stand up to men like Crestwood. Already too many graves from people who would not bow." The word settled heavy in Caleb's chest. He nodded once and left, the medicine and Chen's blessing tucked carefully in his saddlebag. He was halfway back to the farm when riders intercepted him. Not Kane's men. These wore proper suits and rode expensive horses, moving with the careful arrogance of people who believed the law was a tool to be used rather than a principle to be followed. At their center rode Harlan Crestwood himself. Crestwood was smaller than Caleb expected, maybe 5'8",
slight build, the kind of man who'd learned early to use money and manipulation because physical presence wasn't an option, but his eyes were intelligent and cold, assessing Caleb the way a banker assesses collateral. "Dr. Thornton," Crestwood said pleasantly, "I've been hoping we'd have a chance to talk." Caleb's hand drifted toward his pistol. "I've got nothing to say to you." "No? I think we have quite a bit to discuss. For instance, the unfortunate misunderstanding that led to Mr. Kane's arrest, the regrettable actions of men who exceeded their authority, the need for reasonable people to find reasonable solutions. Your hired gun held a child at gunpoint. There's no misunderstanding about that." "Ah, yes. The Weston girl. Remarkable child. I understand she has certain gifts. Sees things others don't. Must be quite a burden for a woman in Mrs. Weston's position." Crestwood's smile never reached his eyes. "Which is why I'm prepared to make a generous offer. I'll purchase the Weston property for triple its assessed value. Enough money for Clara and her daughter to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere safe. Somewhere far from all this unpleasantness." "She's not selling." "Everyone sells eventually, Doctor. The only question is price. And I'm offering a very good price. Enough to care for a sick woman, to educate a strange child, to set them both up comfortably for life." Crestwood leaned forward in his saddle. "All it requires is convincing Mrs. Weston to be reasonable, to understand that continuing this fight will only bring more pain, more loss, perhaps even tragedy." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caleb felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. "Is that what you told Samuel Weston before you had him killed? Be reasonable or face tragedy?" "I had nothing to do with Samuel Weston's death. That was an accident, thoroughly investigated by local authorities and found to be exactly what it appeared, a terrible mishap involving a faulty rope and an old well. Except it wasn't. We have documents proving you ordered his murder, proving you've been systematically eliminating anyone who wouldn't sell. That's not business, Crestwood. That's organized crime." For just a moment, Crestwood's pleasant mask slipped. "Those documents are forgeries. Fabrications created by a disturbed old man and a widow desperate for someone to blame for her husband's death. No court will accept them as evidence." Adelaide Shaw seems to think otherwise. So do the federal marshals. So will the people of this territory when they read her story in the Denver Post. Miss Shaw is an ambitious woman with a reputation for sensationalism, and the marshals are pursuing a vendetta against Mr. Kane based on flimsy connections and circumstantial evidence. None of it touches me." Crestwood straightened. "But I'm a reasonable man. I don't want this situation to escalate further. So I'm making this offer once, Dr. Thornton. Convince Mrs. Weston to sell. Take your payment. I'm prepared to compensate you handsomely for your time and trouble. Move on with your life. Everyone wins. Except the people you murdered. I've murdered no one, and you can't prove otherwise." Crestwood's voice hardened. "But you should know something about proof, Doctor, about how it can cut both ways. For instance, I have proof that you were involved in the Montana mining disaster. Proof that you signed off on safety reports you never actually filed. Proof that your negligence directly contributed to 40 deaths." Caleb went cold. "That's a lie." "Is it? I have documents with your signature. Testimony from survivors placing you in charge of operations. Even a letter you allegedly wrote to the mine foreman, instructing him to ignore structural concerns because fixing them would cost too much time and money." Crestwood smiled. "Forgeries, of course, but very convincing ones. And if those documents were to surface, if witnesses were to come forward, your name would be destroyed all over again. Any testimony you might offer in court would be dismissed as revenge from a disgraced doctor with an axe to grind." The elegant trap of it took Caleb's breath away. Crestwood had been preparing for this possibility all along. Insurance against witnesses, leverage against anyone who might threaten his empire. He didn't need to kill Caleb. He just needed to destroy his credibility. "You can't use those documents without drawing attention to yourself," Caleb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Can I? All it takes is an anonymous tip to the right journalist. A suggestion that Dr. Caleb Thornton isn't the tragic figure he appears to be, but rather a man with blood on his hands trying to deflect blame. The story writes itself. And by the time anyone untangles the truth from the lies, the damage will be done. You'll be ruined. your testimony worthless, and I'll still be standing exactly where I am now. One of Crestwood's men shifted his horse closer, hand resting on his gun. A reminder that while they were having a civilized conversation, violence was always an option. Caleb looked at these well-dressed men with their expensive horses and legal threats, and felt the same helpless rage he'd felt watching his family die under Montana stone. The law was supposed to protect people. Instead, it protected men like Crestwood who knew how to use it as a weapon. "You won't win," Caleb said quietly. "Maybe you'll destroy me. Maybe you'll make Clara's life hell, but eventually, people like you always lose, because there's always someone willing to stand up, always someone who won't be bought or threatened or broken." "Perhaps, but not today." Crestwood gathered his reins. "Think about my offer, Doctor. You have until tomorrow evening. After that, things become complicated. For everyone." They rode past him, leaving Caleb alone on the road with medicine growing warm in his saddlebag and the bitter taste of defeat in his mouth. When he returned to the farm, he found Adelaide still there, sitting on the porch with Ezra while Hope played in the dust nearby. The journalist looked up as he dismounted, her expression shrewd. "You look like a man who just had an unpleasant conversation." "Crestwood intercepted me on the way back. That got everyone's attention." Ezra sat up straighter, wincing at the movement. Hope stopped playing, her hands going still. "What did he want?" Adelaide asked. "To buy Clara's cooperation, and to remind me that rich men have long reach and good lawyers." Caleb pulled the medicine from his saddlebag. "He's got forged documents ready to destroy my credibility if I testify against him. Probably has similar leverage against anyone else who might pose a threat." "Bastard," Ezra muttered. "That's how he stayed untouchable all this time. Always one step ahead, always with insurance." Adelaide's expression had gone thoughtful. "Forged documents require forgers. Someone who knows how to reproduce official letterhead, mimic signatures, create convincing paper trails. That's specialized work. Not many people in this territory with that skill set." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Ezra asked. "I'm thinking if we can find the forger, we can prove the documents are fraudulent. And more importantly, we can trace them directly back to Crestwood. Turn his insurance policy into evidence of obstruction and witness intimidation." "Finding a forger in frontier territory is like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach," Caleb said. "And even if we find them, what makes you think they'd testify against the man paying them?" Adelaide smiled, sharp and predatory. "Because I'm very good at convincing people that truth serves their interests better than lies. And because forgers are pragmatists. They work for whoever pays best. Right now that's Crestwood. But if he's going down anyway, they'll save themselves by cooperating with authorities. Classic rat leaving a sinking ship." Hope spoke up from her spot in the dust. "The forger's name is Marcus Webb. He works in the assayer's office, and he'll talk to you if you promise he won't go to jail." 3 adult faces turned to stare at her. "How do you know that?" Adelaide asked carefully. Hope shrugged. "I saw it, last night. In my dream, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and bad teeth. He's scared. He wants out. He just needs someone to offer him a way." "Even if that's true," Caleb said gently, "we can't just walk into town and accuse the assayer's clerk of forgery based on a child's dream." "Why not?" Hope looked up at him with perfect seriousness. "I've been right about everything else." She had a point. She'd predicted Caleb's arrival, the attack on the farm, Kane's presence in town, even Adelaide's appearance with the marshals. At what point did her visions stop being lucky guesses and start being reliable intelligence? Adelaide was already packing her notebook. "I'm going to talk to Marshal Garrett, see if he'll help us approach this Webb character. Even if Hope's wrong about him, someone in this territory is doing Crestwood's dirty paperwork. Finding them is our best shot at closing the net. And if Crestwood finds out you're investigating his forger, then he'll know we're not backing down. That pressure works both ways." Adelaide stood, adjusting her hat against the afternoon sun. "Men like Crestwood count on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. The moment you prove you're neither, they start making mistakes." She left with her assistant in tow, heading back towards Silver Creek with the determination of a woman who'd found a thread to pull and wouldn't stop until the whole garment unraveled. Ezra watched her go with something like admiration. "That's a dangerous woman." Dangerous to people who deserve it, Caleb said. He turned to Hope. I need to give your mother this medicine. You want to help? Hope nodded solemnly and followed him inside. Clara was worse. The fever had climbed while Caleb was gone, her breathing shallow and labored, her skin burning to the touch. Hope held her mother's hand while Caleb mixed Chen's herbs with hot water, creating a bitter-smelling tea that made Hope's nose wrinkle. She won't like it, Hope said. Most medicine tastes terrible. That's how you know it works. They coaxed Clara awake enough to drink. She protested weakly, tried to push the cup away, but Caleb was patient, and Hope was insistent, and eventually Clara swallowed the medicine down. Within minutes, she'd fallen back into restless sleep, her breathing slightly easier. Will she be all right? Hope asked. Caleb wanted to give her certainty, wanted to promise her mother would recover fully and quickly. But he'd learned 4 years ago that promises made in the face of illness were often just pretty lies told to ease fear. I don't know, he said honestly. The medicine will help, rest will help, but her body's been fighting for a long time. Sometimes that exhaustion is harder to cure than the illness itself. Hope absorbed this with the grave acceptance of someone who'd already learned that life didn't guarantee happy endings. You won't leave us, though, even if she gets worse, even if it takes a long time. It still wasn't a question. Caleb looked at this child who saw futures and somehow saw him staying when everything in his past screamed that he should run. No, he said quietly, I won't leave. Good, because you're part of the story now, the way it's supposed to unfold. You running away would break the pattern. What pattern? The one where broken people help fix each other. Hope squeezed her mother's hand gently. You think you're here to save us, but really, we're all saving each other. That's how it works. Before Caleb could respond, shouting erupted outside. He moved to the window, hand dropping to his pistol, expecting Crestwood's men or some new threat. Instead, he saw Marshal Garrett riding in hard with 2 of his deputies, their faces grim with news. Caleb stepped onto the porch. What's wrong? Kane, Garrett said shortly. He's gone. The words didn't make sense at first. What do you mean gone? You arrested him. He was in irons. Was being the key word. Someone broke him out an hour ago while we were transferring him to the wagon for transport to Denver. Professional job. 4 masked riders, good horses, in and out before we could mount a proper response. Killed one of my deputies in the process. Ice flooded through Caleb's veins. Where is he now? That's what I came to tell you. He left a message. Said to tell Dr. Thornton that running time is over. Said he'll be waiting at the old mining camp 20 miles north of here at sunset. Come alone or he starts burning farms until you do. Ezra appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame. That's a trap, obvious as daylight. Of course it's a trap, Garrett agreed. Which is why you're not going anywhere near it, Doc. Let me handle this. I've got men, resources, experience tracking fugitives through rough country. This is what I do. And while you're organizing your manhunt, Kane burns down how many farms? Kills how many people? Caleb shook his head. No, this is between him and me. Has been since Montana. I go. I end it. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's suicide on my terms, not his. Hope came to stand beside Caleb, her small hand finding his. When she spoke, her voice carried that eerie certainty that made the hair on his neck rise. He needs to go. It's part of the pattern, the confrontation that should have happened 4 years ago. The reckoning that was delayed but never canceled. Hope, no, Ezra started. But he doesn't go alone, Hope continued, her eyes distant like she was reading from a script only she could see. The marshal goes, hidden, watching, ready to act when the moment comes. Because this isn't just about revenge, it's about justice. And justice requires witnesses. Garrett studied the child with the kind of respect usually reserved for oracles and officers who'd proven themselves in battle. You see how this plays out, little miss. Some of it, not all of it. But I see enough to know Mr. Thornton survives. And I see Silas Kane facing what he's earned. The details are blurry, but the ending is clear. Clear enough for me, Garrett said. He looked at Caleb. All right, Doc. Here's how we do this. You ride in at sunset like he demanded. Keep him talking. Give my men time to get into position. When the shooting starts, and it will start, you get down and stay down. Let professionals handle the violence. I'm not hiding while other people fight my battles. Then don't hide. Fight. But fight smart, not stupid. Cain wants you angry and reckless. Don't give him that satisfaction. It was sound advice from a man who'd survived long enough to give it. Caleb nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what he was agreeing to settle on his shoulders. I need to check on Clara first, make sure she's stable. You've got 2 hours until sunset, Garrett said. Use them well. The marshal and his men rode out to prepare. Ezra retreated inside, muttering about checking ammunition and making sure his pistol was properly cleaned. Hope stayed on the porch with Caleb, watching the sun arc toward evening. You're scared, she observed. Of course I'm scared. Only fools aren't scared before a fight. That's not what I mean. You're scared of what comes after, if you survive, if this all works out. You're scared of having to decide what happens next. Caleb looked down at her. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise. Adults just don't usually listen. She leaned against his side, a gesture of trust and affection that made his chest hurt. It's okay to be scared of good things, Mr. Thornton. Sometimes they're more frightening than bad things because they mean you have something to lose again. But that's what makes them worth having. Inside, Clara stirred, calling out in fever dreams for her daughter and her dead husband. Hope went to her immediately, murmuring reassurances in a voice too gentle for someone so young. Caleb followed, checked Clara's temperature, adjusted blankets, administered more medicine with hands that had steadied other people through countless crises, but never quite steadied himself. When Clara finally settled back into quieter sleep, Hope looked up at him. You have to come back. She needs you. Not just for medicine, for everything that comes after. After what? After the fighting stops and the rebuilding begins. After the bad men are gone and the hard questions remain. She's going to need someone who understands loss. Who knows what it's like to keep going when everything says you should stop? Someone who can stand beside her without trying to fix her or save her, just be there while she saves herself. That's a lot of faith to put in a man who's been running for 4 years. You stopped running. That's what matters. Hope took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Promise me you'll come back. I can't promise that. Cain is dangerous and desperate, and I don't know. Promise anyway. Even if you're not sure. Even if it's just words. Because words matter. They shape what happens next. Caleb looked at this child who spoke like a prophet and needed him like a father and believed in him despite every reason not to. He thought about Clara fighting for survival in the next room, about Ezra keeping watch despite a wound that should have killed him, about Adelaide Shaw with her notebook and her relentless pursuit of truth, about all these people who'd somehow become his responsibility when he'd sworn never to be responsible for anyone again. I promise, he said. I'll come back. Hope smiled, small and sad and somehow certain. I know. I saw it. The sun crawled toward the horizon with the inevitability of judgment. Caleb prepared with the methodical calm of someone who'd accepted that death might be waiting but refused to make it easy. He cleaned his pistol, checked his ammunition, made sure his knife was sharp and accessible. Ezra offered additional weapons, a backup pistol, a rifle, a vicious-looking blade that had seen plenty of use, but Caleb declined. He'd faced Cain the same way he'd faced everything else these past 4 years, stripped down, exposed, with nothing but skill and determination to see him through. Marshal Garrett returned with 4 men as the light turned gold. They were all experienced trackers, Indian fighters, veterans of range wars and territorial disputes, men who knew how to move quietly through rough country and how to shoot straight when silence ended. My men will be in position an hour before sunset, Garrett explained, unfolding a rough map of the mining camp. Here, here, and here. High ground, good sight lines, far enough back that Cain won't spot them unless he's specifically looking. You ride in from the south, the obvious approach. That focuses his attention away from where my men are positioned. What if he's got men positioned too? Then we have ourselves a good old-fashioned shooting match. But intel says he broke out with 4 riders, and one of them got killed in the escape. That leaves 3, maybe 4 men, including Cain. We've got 6. Numbers favor us. Numbers didn't save 40 miners in Montana. Garrett's expression softened slightly. No, but you weren't in charge then. You were a doctor trying to save lives, not a soldier trying to end a threat. This time you know what you're walking into. That changes everything. Caleb wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe knowledge and preparation could overcome the fundamental truth that men like Cain specialized in chaos and destruction. He checked on Clara one last time before leaving. She was sleeping more peacefully now, the herbs and medicine beginning their slow work. Hope sat beside her mother's bed, braiding grass stems with the same focused intensity she'd shown all day. I'm leaving now, Caleb said quietly. Hope looked up. I know, be smart, be careful. And remember, Cain wants you angry. Don't give him what he wants. When did you become the adult in this conversation? The moment my mother got sick and my father died and the world decided I needed to grow up faster than I wanted to. She set down her braiding. But that's okay. Someone had to. Might as well be me. Caleb crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. You shouldn't have to carry this, Hope. None of it. Not the visions, not the worry, not the responsibility of keeping everyone safe. But I do carry it. So the question isn't whether I should. The question is whether I have help carrying it, and now I do. Because you're here, and you're coming back. She said it with such absolute certainty that Caleb almost believed her. He rode out as the sun touched the western peaks, painting the world in shades of amber and blood. The mining camp sat in a narrow canyon 20 miles north, abandoned for 3 years after the company went bankrupt, leaving behind empty buildings and equipment too expensive to move. It was the perfect place for an ambush. Isolated, defensible, easy to control, which meant Cain had chosen it carefully. Garrett and his men had left an hour earlier, taking a circuitous route through the hills to avoid detection. Caleb rode alone, watching the landscape change from grassland to scrub to rocky terrain that looked like the bones of the earth pushing through skin. He arrived as the sun balanced on the horizon, turning the canyon into a cathedral of light and shadow. The mining camp looked exactly like he remembered. Weathered buildings clustered around a central yard, equipment rusting in the elements, the dark mouth of the mine shaft itself gaping like a wound in the hillside. And standing in the center of it all, exactly where he'd promised to be, stood Silas Cain. He'd cleaned up since the arrest. Fresh clothes, hair combed back, gun belt polished to a high shine. He looked almost respectable except for the rope burns on his wrists and the cold fury in his eyes. Dr. Thornton, Cain called across the distance. Punctual as always, I appreciate that in a man. Caleb dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. You wanted to talk. I'm here. Talk. Are you alone? Do you see anyone else? I see a man who spent 4 years running suddenly developing a spine. Makes me wonder what changed. Cain's gaze swept the surrounding ridges. Makes me wonder if perhaps you brought friends to even the odds. You said come alone or you'd burn farms. I came alone. Liar, Cain smiled, but I appreciate the effort. Shows you've learned something about tactics since Montana. He gestured toward the largest building. Shall we have our conversation inside? More private that way, less chance of eavesdroppers. It was another trap, obvious as daylight. Going inside meant losing sight of Garrett's men, meant putting himself in a confined space where numbers didn't matter as much as speed and ruthlessness. Every instinct screamed to refuse. But Hope had said he survived this, had seen it in visions that had proven reliable before. So either she was right and walking into that building wouldn't kill him, or she was wrong, and he was about to die because he'd put too much faith in a 7-year-old's dreams. Caleb started walking. Brave, Cain observed, or stupid. Sometimes hard to tell the difference. They entered the building together, an old bunkhouse that still smelled of unwashed men and lost hopes. Cain had set up in the corner a bottle of whiskey on a crate serving his table, 2 tin cups waiting to be filled. Drink? He offered. No? Suit yourself. Cain poured 1 cup full, took a long swallow. You know what the worst part about Montana was? Not the deaths, not the investigation, not even the collapse of my operation. It was knowing that you were out there somewhere, the only loose end, the only person who could connect me to everything if you ever stopped running long enough to remember what you knew. I remember everything, Every lie you told. Every man who died because of your greed. Greed? Cain tasted the word like wine. Such a simple explanation for complex motivations. You think I wanted those miners dead? They were profitable. Alive, they made me money. Dead, they made me problems. But the territorial governor got too close, started asking too many questions. The cave-in was insurance, a tragic accident that buried evidence along with bodies. And my wife? My daughter? What were they? Collateral damage? Honestly? Yes. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I didn't even know they were there until afterward. If I'd known, I might have done things differently. Cain shrugged. Or maybe not. The mathematics of violence don't change based on who dies, only how many and whether it achieves the intended purpose. Rage flooded through Caleb like wildfire. He took a step forward, hand moving toward his gun. Cain didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched with those empty eyes and smiled. There it is, he said softly. The anger I've been waiting for. The loss you've been carrying like stones in your pockets. Go ahead, doctor. Draw. Shoot me. End this. Give yourself the revenge you've wanted for 4 years. Caleb's hand hovered over his pistol, trembling with fury and grief and 4 years of anguish that had nowhere else to go. And then he heard Hope's voice in his memory. If you kill him, he wins by turning you into him. His hand dropped. No. No? Cain's eyebrows rose. You're not going to shoot me? After everything I took from you? You want me to become like you. Want me to choose murder over justice. But I'm not you, Cain, and I'm done letting you define who I am. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Cain's face. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. This wasn't the reaction he'd engineered so carefully. You really think justice matters out here? Cain demanded. You think marshals and trials and newspaper stories change anything? I'll be out in 6 months, less if Crestwood's lawyers are as good as they claim. And then what? You think you've won because you took the moral high ground? I think I've won because I stopped running, because I chose to stand for something instead of just against everything. That's more victory than you'll ever understand. Outside, voices shouted. Gunfire cracked across the canyon, not the disciplined volleys of lawmen, but the desperate firing of cornered men. Cain's expression shifted from uncertainty to fury. Your friends, you did bring them. I came alone like you demanded. What the marshal does on his own time isn't my responsibility. More gunfire, closer now. The sharp reports of repeating rifles, the deeper boom of shotguns, men screaming orders and dying curses. Cain grabbed his pistol, but Caleb was faster. He cleared leather and fired in one motion, the bullet taking Cain in the shoulder and spinning him back against the wall. The whiskey bottle shattered. Cain dropped his gun, clutching his wounded arm, his face twisted with pain and rage. You shot me, he said, almost surprised. I did, but I didn't kill you. That's the difference between us. Garrett burst through the door, pistol drawn, 2 deputies behind him. Drop your... He saw Cain on the ground, wounded but alive, and holstered his weapon. Doc, you all right? Fine. Cain tried to draw. I defended myself. Self-defense. Good. Garrett moved to secure Cain, snapping irons on wrists still healing from the first set. Silas Cain, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, escape from custody, and being generally too much trouble for one lifetime. Cain laughed, bitter and broken. You haven't won. Crestwood's still out there. Still protected. This changes nothing. Maybe, Garrett agreed, but you'll be in prison, so that's something. They hauled Cain outside into twilight that had turned the canyon into a study in shadow and dying light. 3 of Cain's men were dead. The 4th had surrendered when he realized how badly outnumbered he was. Garrett's deputies were efficient and professional, securing the scene, documenting evidence, preparing for the long ride back to Silver Creek. Caleb stood in the gathering dark and felt nothing. No triumph. No relief. Just the hollow exhaustion of a man who'd finally stopped running but hadn't yet figured out how to stand still. Garrett approached, reading his expression with the accuracy of long experience. You're wondering if it was worth it. Was it? You're alive. Cain's captured. Nobody innocent died today. I'd call that a win. It doesn't feel like winning.
It never does. Not immediately. Justice is the slowest, least satisfying form of resolution there is. But it's the only kind that lasts. Garrett clapped Caleb on the shoulder. Come on, Doc. Let's go home. Home. A word Caleb hadn't used in 4 years. But as they rode back through darkness toward a farm where a sick woman fought for life and a prophet child waited with grass-braided certainty, he found himself believing it might actually mean something again. The stars came out overhead, cold and distant and beautiful. And somewhere ahead, Hope Weston sat on a porch waiting for a man who'd finally learned the difference between running from the past and walking toward a future. They rode through darkness with prisoners in irons and the weight of violence still hanging in the air like smoke. Caleb kept his eyes on the road ahead, watching shadows shift across land that looked different at night, softer somehow, like the darkness forgave what daylight exposed. Behind him, Kane rode in silence, his wounded shoulder bandaged roughly, his face a mask of fury and calculation even in defeat. Marshal Garrett rode alongside Caleb, his weathered face thoughtful in the starlight. You handled yourself well back there. Cool head under pressure. That's rare. I've had practice staying calm when everything's falling apart. I imagine you have. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then said, What you did, not killing him when you had the chance, that took more strength than pulling the trigger would have. Most men don't understand that. I almost didn't. Almost gave him exactly what he wanted. But you didn't. That's what counts. Garrett shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking. What happens now, Doc? When this is all over and the trials are done and you don't have revenge driving you forward anymore? It was the question Caleb had been avoiding since the moment he'd promised Hope he'd come back. For 4 years, running had given him purpose. Grief had given him direction. But now, with Kane captured and justice grinding forward on its slow, inevitable wheels, what was left? I don't know, Caleb admitted. I haven't thought past surviving the day. Might be time to start. You've got skills this territory needs. A sick woman who could use a doctor who gives a damn. A child who sees you as something worth believing in. Garrett's voice was gentle but firm. Man can only run for so long before he has to admit he's looking for a reason to stop. They reached the farm near midnight. Lamplight glowed in the windows, Hope keeping vigil, refusing sleep until she knew the ending her visions had promised. She burst onto the porch as they rode up, her face flooding with relief when she saw Caleb upright and breathing. You came back, she said, like there'd been doubt despite her certainty. Told you I would. Hope looked past him to where Kane sat bound and bleeding on his horse. Her expression went still, distant, reading futures in the set of his shoulders. He's not done fighting, even now, even defeated. Maybe not, but he's going to prison. That'll have to be enough. For now. Hope turned her attention back to Caleb, her small hands reaching up to touch his arm like she needed physical proof of his presence. Mama's fever broke an hour ago. She's sleeping real now, not fever sleep. She asked for you. Something warm and unexpected bloomed in Caleb's chest. I should check on her. Make sure the improvement holds. Garrett took charge of the prisoners, organizing his men to stand watch through the night. They'd transport everyone to Silver Creek at first light, begin the formal process of charging Kane with crimes that would keep him locked away for whatever remained of his miserable life. It was efficient and professional, and exactly what justice required. But Caleb wasn't thinking about justice as he followed Hope inside. He was thinking about Clara's fever breaking, about medicine working the way it was supposed to, about small victories that mattered more than grand gestures of revenge. Clara lay in the narrow bed looking smaller than she should, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful, in genuine rest. Caleb checked her pulse, stronger now, steadier, and felt the physician's satisfaction of diagnosis confirmed and treatment succeeding. She's going to be all right, he told Hope, who'd positioned herself in the doorway like a guardian. The infection's breaking. Another few days of medicine and rest, she'll be back on her feet. And you'll be here to make sure she takes it, the medicine and the rest. It still wasn't a question. Caleb looked at this child who spoke in certainties and wondered when he'd stopped fighting the future she kept seeing for him. I'll be here, he said quietly. Hope smiled, the first genuine, uncomplicated smile he'd seen from her since they'd met. Good, because there's more coming. Not bad things, different things. Things that need you here to help us figure them out. What kind of things? I don't know yet.
The visions get fuzzy when I try to look too far ahead, but I know they're important, and I know we face them together. Ezra appeared behind Hope, looking stronger than he had any right to after being shot less than 2 days ago. The old man had the resilience of weathered leather, worn but unbreakable. Marshall says Kane's secured for the night. They'll move him at dawn. His eyes found Caleb. You did good work today, son. Your family would be proud. The words hit harder than Caleb expected. He had to swallow past sudden tightness in his throat. I don't know about that. I do. I've seen a lot of men in my years, seen how they handle loss, how they choose what to do with pain. Most let it poison them, turn them mean or broken or both. You let it hollow you out instead. Safer that way, I imagine. Can't lose what you don't have. Ezra moved into the room with careful steps. But you're filling back up now. I can see it. And that takes more courage than staying empty ever did.
What?
Caleb didn't know how to respond to that kind of scene, that kind of truth delivered without ceremony in the middle of the night. So he just nodded and turned back to Clara, checking her breathing, adjusting blankets with hands that had gotten used to caring again despite his best efforts. He sat with her through the darkest hours when Hope finally succumbed to exhaustion in her corner and Ezra dozed in the chair by the stove. Outside, Garrett's men maintained watch, their low voices and the occasional strike of a match marking time in the silence. Clara stirred occasionally, murmuring words Caleb couldn't quite catch, reaching for something in dreams that might have been memory or hope or simple fever breaking toward clarity. Near dawn, her eyes opened. For a moment she seemed confused, disoriented by darkness and unfamiliar ceiling. Then her gaze found Caleb and focused. You're still here, she said, her voice rough from illness and sleep. Where else would I be? Gone, running. That's what men do when things get complicated. There was no bitterness in it, just observation born from experience. I'm done running. Clara studied his face with the same intensity her daughter had shown, reading truth in the set of his jaw, the steadiness of his gaze. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she relaxed back into the pillows. Hope told me what happened, with Kane, with the marshals, with everything. She paused, gathering strength. She also told me you promised to stay. That true? It's true. Why? You don't owe us anything. Didn't even know us a week ago. Caleb thought about that question, about all the complicated answers he could give, about debt and redemption and the way saving others sometimes saved yourself. But in the end, he settled on simpler truth. Because your daughter asked me to, and because somewhere along the way this stopped being about obligation and started being about choice. Clara's eyes glistened with something that might have been tears or might have been just fever after effects. I can't pay you, can barely keep this farm running as it is. Whatever you're expecting in return, I'm not expecting anything. I'm just a doctor who found patients who need him. Everything else is just details we'll figure out as we go. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we've all been making it complicated for too long. Before Clara could respond, Hope stirred in her corner, sitting up with the instant alertness of children who never quite learned to trust sleep. Mama's awake, she announced unnecessarily. I am, baby. Come here. Hope crossed the room and climbed onto the bed with practiced ease, curling against her mother's side like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Clara wrapped her arm around her daughter and closed her eyes, breathing in the simple reality of her child safe and warm and here. We're going to be all right, Clara said. Not a question, not even really hope. Just statement of fact delivered with the certainty of someone who'd survived the worst and found herself still standing. We are, Caleb agreed. And in that moment, in that small room with dawn breaking outside and a child curled safe beside her mother, it felt like truth instead of wish. The next days moved with the strange rhythm of aftermath, too fast and too slow simultaneously. Garrett transported Kane and his remaining men to the territorial capital, where lawyers descended like carrion birds, and the machinery of justice ground into motion. Adelaide Shaw's story hit the Denver Post with the force of dynamite, spreading across the territory in waves that forced even the most reluctant officials to pay attention. Within a week, Harlan Crestwood was arrested. The banker had made a run for it, tried to flee to California with his fortune converted to bearer bonds and gold. But Marcus Webb, the assayer's clerk and forger that Hope had seen in her visions, had turned on his employer with the enthusiastic cooperation of a rat abandoning a sinking ship. His testimony connected Crestwood directly to every murder, every forgery, every act of intimidation and corruption that had built the banker's empire. Adelaide covered it all with journalist precision and storyteller's flair. Her articles painted Silver Creek as a microcosm of frontier justice, the story of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary corruption, of a widow who wouldn't be silenced and a child who saw truth when adults looked away. She mentioned Caleb only in passing, respecting his desire to remain peripheral to a story that had consumed him completely. Clara's recovery was slower than her daughter's visions had suggested, but steadier than Caleb had dared hope. The fever broke completely after 3 days, leaving her weak but clear-eyed, able to sit up and take broth and eventually walk to the porch with assistance. Caleb monitored her progress with professional detachment that fooled absolutely no one, least of all Hope, who watched him watch her mother with knowing eyes and small, satisfied smiles. Ezra healed with the stubborn resilience of men who'd survived too much to die from something as mundane as a bullet wound. Within a week, he was back on his feet, moving carefully, but moving, helping with chores and keeping Hope entertained with stories from his youth that were probably half fiction and entirely captivating. And Caleb stayed. Not because he'd promised, though he had. Not because they needed him, though they did. He stayed because leaving had stopped making sense, because this farm with its weathered boards and hard earth felt more like home than anywhere he'd been since Montana, because Clara's quiet strength and Hope's unwavering certainty and even Ezra's gruff wisdom had become the framework around which he was rebuilding something that looked almost like a life. 2 weeks after Kane's arrest, a letter arrived from the territorial governor. It was addressed to Mrs. Clara Weston, but delivered by official courier with the kind of ceremony that suggested importance beyond the usual mail. Clara opened it on the porch with Caleb and Hope watching. Her eyes moved across the formal language, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something that might have been vindication. "They're voiding the sale," she said quietly. "Every property transaction Crestwood forced through in the past 5 years. Declared them fraudulent and returning ownership to the original holders." She looked up, her eyes bright. "Samuel's death has been officially ruled a murder. They're offering compensation. Not that money brings him back, but—" Her voice broke. Hope moved to her mother's side immediately, small arms wrapping around Clara's waist in fierce protection. "It's not enough," Clara continued after a moment. "A letter and some money doesn't balance the scales for what they took. But it's something. It's acknowledgement. It's the territory admitting they failed us." "It's more than most people ever get," Ezra observed from his spot against the porch rail. "Frontier justice usually ends with graves and silence. This is actual justice, rare as hen's teeth and twice as valuable." The letter went on to detail the investigation's findings. 37 suspicious deaths connected to Crestwood's land acquisition scheme, hundreds of forged documents, enough corruption to fill volumes of legal proceedings that would drag on for years. The governor promised full transparency, promised reform, promised all the things politicians promised when scandal forced their hand. But what mattered to Clara was simpler. Her husband's name was cleared. The official record would show Samuel Weston died fighting for his land, not because of negligence or bad luck. That truth would outlive the pain. "There's more," Clara said, still reading. "They're offering me a position, consultant to the Territorial Land Office, reviewing disputed claims, investigating suspicious transactions. Says my experience makes me uniquely qualified to help prevent this from happening again." Caleb felt pride bloom unexpected in his chest. "That's remarkable. You'd be perfect for it." "I'd have to travel. Go to Denver for meetings. Leave the farm for weeks at a time." Clara looked at Hope. "I can't do that. Not with everything here that needs tending." "You could if you had help," Ezra said carefully. "Someone to manage things while you're gone. Someone who knows the land and the people and has a vested interest in keeping everything running smooth." He was looking at Caleb when he said it. Clara followed his gaze, her expression questioning.
Caleb's got his own life to build. Can't expect him to drop everything to run my farm. Why not? Hope asked with that maddening certainty. He's already here, already helping, already part of this. She looked up at Caleb. Unless you're planning on leaving, after all? Three faces turned to him, waiting. Caleb felt the weight of the moment, the choice being offered disguised as practical necessity. He could say yes and commit himself fully to this place, these people, this future that Hope kept insisting was already written. Or he could demur politely, maintain the fiction that he was just passing through despite evidence to the contrary. I'd need to build a proper clinic, he heard himself say. Can't practice medicine out of a kitchen when winter comes. Need space for patients, for supplies, for the kind of work this territory needs. Clara's face transformed, hope and relief, and something warmer flooding her expression. We could clear the old barn. It's weather-tight, good bones, just needs finishing inside. Be perfect for a clinic. I'd need help. Can't build it alone. I can help, Ezra volunteered immediately. Once the shoulder heals proper, know my way around hammer and nails. I can help too, Hope added. I'm small, but I'm strong, and I can see where things should go before you waste time putting them in the wrong place. Caleb looked at these people who'd adopted him without asking permission, who'd decided he belonged before he'd admitted he wanted to belong. The old fear rose up. What if he failed them like he'd failed his family? What if staying meant watching more people he cared about die? But beneath the fear was something stronger, the bone-deep exhaustion of running, the quiet truth that he'd rather risk loss than guarantee emptiness. All right, he said, we'll build a clinic. Make this official. Hope threw her arms around him with enough force to nearly knock him over. Clara smiled, genuine and warm and beautiful in the morning light. Even Ezra looked pleased, his gruff exterior cracking to show satisfaction underneath. Welcome home, Doc, the old man said, and for the first time in 4 years, Caleb didn't flinch at the word. The weeks that followed fell into pattern, the kind of rhythm that felt less like routine and more like the steady heartbeat of something being built from scratch. Caleb and Ezra worked on the barn conversion, tearing out old stalls and replacing them with walls, installing windows salvaged from abandoned buildings in town, creating space that could serve as examination room, surgery, and storage. Hope helped where she could, mostly by keeping them supplied with water and predicting when boards were about to crack under stress or nails were about to bend wrong. Clara regained her strength slowly, her body remembering how to fight illness after weeks of just surviving it. She took short walks at first, then longer ones, reacquainting herself with land that was fully hers again now that Crestwood's claims had been voided. She found herself smiling at unexpected moments, while feeding chickens, while watching Hope play in the dust, while observing Caleb measure boards with the focused precision of someone who'd learned to find purpose in details. Adelaide Shaw visited twice more, documenting the aftermath for follow-up stories that kept pressure on officials and reminded readers that justice required vigilance. She interviewed Clara formally this time, getting the full story of Samuel's death and the years that followed, the quiet heroism of a woman who'd refused to be erased. Those articles painted Clara as frontier icon, the widow who fought an empire and won. Clara hated the attention but endured it because Adelaide made clear that her story mattered beyond personal grievance. Other widows facing similar pressure read those articles and found courage. Other small landowners documented their own suspicious encounters, building cases that would take years to prosecute, but finally had a framework for accountability. One evening near sunset, Clara found Caleb on the half-finished clinic porch, watching light paint the western sky in shades of amber and blood. She settled beside him without asking permission, the easy comfort of people who'd survived crisis together. Hope says you're planning to stay, Clara said after a comfortable silence. Not just for the clinic, really stay. That bother you? No, just want to make sure I understand what that means. For you, for us, for whatever this is becoming. Caleb considered his words carefully. 4 years ago, I lost everything that mattered. Spent all that time since convinced I'd used up my chance at mattering to anyone, that the best I could do was drift through other people's lives without leaving marks. He paused, watching a hawk circle overhead. But Hope seems to think I matter here, and you've trusted me with your life and your daughter's life.
And Ezra treats me like family despite knowing me barely a month. So I guess what this means is I'm choosing to believe them instead of the voice in my head that says I don't deserve another chance. Clara absorbed this with the quiet consideration of someone who understood loss and rebuilding. Samuel used to say that life doesn't ask if we deserve second chances. It just offers them and waits to see if we're brave enough to take them. Sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Stubborn, sometimes infuriating, but wise. Claire's voice softened with memory. He'd like you, I think. Would appreciate that you stayed when leaving was easier. That you're helping his daughter grow up in a world where the bad men actually face consequences. I'm not replacing him, Clara. Don't want you to think, I don't. Samuel's gone. Missing him is permanent, but that doesn't mean there's no room for new people, new connections. Hope sees that clearer than either of us. She's not looking for a father to replace the one she lost. She's just accepting the people who show up and prove they're staying. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead. Inside the house, Hope sang something wordless and content while helping Ezra prepare dinner. The ordinary sounds of domestic life, a kind of peace Caleb had forgotten existed. The territorial office wants me in Denver next month, Clara said eventually. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Training, meetings, setting up the consultation framework. I've been putting off answering because leaving Hope felt impossible. But now? Now I'm thinking maybe it's not impossible. If she's here with people who care about her, people I trust. Clara looked at him directly. Would you and Ezra be willing to manage things while I'm gone? The farm, the child, the 1,000 small crises that come with both? Of course. But Clara, you don't need my permission to take opportunities. This is your land, your life. I know, but it stopped being just my life when you became part of it, when we became a we, instead of just me and Hope barely holding on. She smiled. I'm asking because I want to, because making decisions together feels better than making them alone. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, the last resistance crumbling, the final wall coming down. Then yes, go to Denver. Do the work you're clearly meant for. We'll keep things running here. And when you come back, we'll still be here waiting. Clara reached out, her hand finding his in the darkness. Her grip was warm and solid and real, not asking for anything except connection, the simple human acknowledgement that they weren't alone anymore. Thank you, she said quietly, for stopping, for staying, for being exactly what we needed when we needed it most. I could say the same about you. They stayed like that until Hope called them for dinner. 2 people who'd survived their own separate catastrophes, learning to build something together from the pieces that remained. The trial began in early autumn, when the heat finally broke and the world turned briefly merciful. Caleb traveled to Denver to testify, bringing with him 4 years of suppressed rage and the careful discipline of a man who'd learned that justice required cold precision rather than hot fury. The courtroom was packed, journalists, victims' families, curious citizens who'd followed the story through Adelaide's articles. Kane sat at the defendant's table in prison clothes, his face gaunt but defiant, his eyes tracking Caleb with predatory focus. Caleb testified for 6 hours. He detailed the Montana mining operation, Kane's recruitment strategy, the systematic negligence that had led to the cave-in. He described finding his wife and daughter crushed under stone, the desperate hours of trying to save them when they were already gone. He laid out evidence methodically, answering prosecutor questions with physician's detachment even when the answers tore at old wounds. Kane's lawyer tried to rattle him on cross-examination, suggesting Caleb's testimony was motivated by revenge rather than truth. But Caleb had spent too many years carrying grief to be shaken by legal theatrics. He answered every question the same way, calmly, precisely, letting facts speak for themselves. When he stepped down from the witness stand, he caught Kane's eyes one final time. The outlaw was still smiling, still convinced that wealth and connections would save him. But Caleb could see the fear underneath, the dawning realization that this time the mathematics of corruption weren't adding up in his favor. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Testimony from survivors, from Kane's former associates who'd turned on him, from Marcus Webb detailing forgeries and fraudulent documents. Adelaide Shaw testified about her investigation, presenting evidence so comprehensive that even Kane's expensive lawyers couldn't find gaps to exploit. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Kane showed no emotion when the verdict was read, but his hands gripped the table hard enough to turn knuckles white. The judge sentenced him to 30 years hard labor, effectively a life sentence for a man his age. As marshals led him away in chains, Kane looked back once at Caleb. There was no threat in that final glance, no promise of revenge or future reckoning. Just the hollow recognition of a man who'd finally run out of exits, meeting the eyes of the one who'd refused to be another victim. Caleb felt nothing watching him go. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet closure of a chapter finally ending. Crestwood's trial followed a month later. The banker maintained his innocence throughout, insisting he'd been deceived by Kane, that he'd had no knowledge of the murders and intimidation. His lawyers were better than Kane's, his connections deeper, his ability to muddy waters more sophisticated. But Clara's testimony destroyed him. She took the stand wearing her best dress, the one she'd saved from her wedding, altered to fit her thinner frame, and told the truth with devastating simplicity. She detailed every threat, every offer to buy her land, every suspicious incident that had plagued her family. She produced letters in Crestwood's own handwriting, meetings documented by witnesses he'd thought were loyal, a paper trail that connected him directly to crimes his lawyers insisted he knew nothing about. When Clara described finding Samuel at the bottom of the well, her voice breaking but never failing, half the jury was crying. When she explained how she'd kept fighting for her daughter's future even while sick and alone, the other half looked ready to hang Crestwood themselves. The banker was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, racketeering, and corruption. The judge sentenced him to 25 years, stripping him of his fortune and ordering restitution to every family he'd wronged. As marshals led Crestwood away, he looked at Clara with pure hatred. She met his gaze steadily, unafraid, and watched him disappear into the future he'd earned. Outside the courthouse, Adelaide found Clara and pulled her into an unexpected hug. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did." "We did it," Clara corrected. "All of us. Together." Caleb stood slightly apart, watching the crowd celebrate justice with the detachment of someone who'd learned that endings were rarely as clean as they appeared. Hope found him there, slipping her small hand into his. "You're thinking it's not really over," she observed. "Is it ever?" "The fighting part is. The bad men are gone. What comes next is different, harder in some ways, easier in others. You see that? In your visions?" Hope tilted her head, considering. "I see us at the farm, building things, growing things, healing things. I see Mama happy again. I see you not running anymore. I see family that doesn't look like other families but works anyway." "That sounds nice." "It is nice, but it's also work. Every day, choosing to stay instead of leave. Choosing to care instead of protect yourself. Choosing to believe the good outweighs the risk." She looked up at him with those ancient eyes. "Are you ready for that kind of work?" Caleb thought about the clinic taking shape in the barn, about Clara consulting for the territorial government to prevent other families from suffering what she'd survived, about Ezra's gruff affection and Hope's unwavering certainty. He thought about how staying had become easier than leaving, how this collection of wounded people had become home when he wasn't looking. "I think so," he said. "I think I'm ready." Hope smiled. "Good, because ready or not, it's already happening." They returned to Silver Creek as winter approached, the land preparing for cold with the same patient inevitability as always. The clinic opened quietly. No ceremony, no grand announcement, just Caleb hanging a shingle and waiting to see if anyone would trust a drifter-turned-doctor with their ailments. They came slowly at first. A rancher with a broken arm, a child with fever, a woman in difficult labor who needed steady hands and calm assurance. Caleb treated them all with the skill that had rusted during 4 years of running, but never quite left, muscle memory of healing taking over where confidence faltered. Word spread. The doctor at the Weston farm didn't ask too many questions, didn't judge, didn't charge more than people could afford to pay. He was strange and quiet and carried sadness like a second skin. But he was competent and careful and genuinely seemed to care whether his patients lived or died. Within a month, Caleb was seeing a dozen patients a week. Within 2 months, he delivered 3 babies, set countless broken bones, and talked a rancher through amputating his own gangrenous toe when infection left no other choice. Clara left for Denver in November, traveling with an escort of territorial rangers who'd been specifically assigned to ensure her safety. She kissed Hope goodbye on the porch, gave Caleb and Ezra detailed instructions about managing the farm, and rode away looking both terrified and exhilarated by the future opening before her. "She'll be fine," Ezra assured Caleb, who stood watching until Clara disappeared over the horizon. "Woman survived Crestwood and Kane. Denver bureaucrats don't stand a chance." Hope tugged on Caleb's sleeve. "Stop worrying. She comes back. I've seen it." "When?" "Winter solstice, just in time for the first snow. She'll be different, stronger, sure of herself in new ways. But still, Mama, you see an awful lot for someone so young." "I see what needs seeing. The rest I ignore." Hope took his hand. "Come on. Mrs. Patterson's boy fell off a horse this morning. His shoulder's probably dislocated. She's waiting at the clinic." They walked together through cold afternoon light, doctor and prophet child, toward the work of healing that had become his life again. Behind them, the farm stood quiet and solid, waiting for Clara's return. Ahead, a patient needed help that only Caleb could provide. And for the first time in 4 years, that felt like exactly where he was supposed to be. Winter came hard and fast, settling over the territory like judgment. Snow fell in waves that buried fences and transformed the landscape into something pristine and unforgiving. Caleb worked through it all, making house calls on snowshoes when roads became impassable, delivering babies in homesteads so remote he wondered how anyone survived out there alone. Hope proved invaluable. Her visions warned when storms were coming, when patients were sicker than they appeared, when treatment was working or failing despite surface signs. At first, people were unsettled by her, a child who knew too much, who spoke with authority beyond her years. But gradually, they came to accept her the way they'd accepted Caleb, recognizing that strangeness was less important than usefulness. Ezra managed the farm with quiet competence, keeping animals fed and buildings maintained through brutal cold. He and Caleb fell into comfortable rhythm, the old man's practical wisdom balancing the doctor's book learning, creating partnership that made hard work easier. Letters came from Clara every week. She wrote about meetings and politics, about fighting bureaucrats who wanted to water down reforms, about slowly building alliances with officials who actually cared about justice. Her words painted pictures of a woman coming into her own power, discovering that survival skills translated perfectly into political navigation. Caleb wrote back carefully, describing the farm and the patients, Hope's latest visions, and Ezra's grumbling complaints about winter. He kept his letters factual, friendly, giving Clara space to grow without the weight of expectation or obligation. But in the margins, between practical updates about livestock and weather, something else emerged: affection, partnership, the quiet recognition that they were building something together even while apart. On winter solstice, exactly as Hope had predicted, Clara came home. She arrived in a territorial carriage with official escort, looking polished and professional in clothes purchased in Denver. But when Hope ran to meet her, Clara dropped all pretense of sophistication and scooped her daughter into her arms with the fierce joy of reunion. "You're taller," Clara said, setting Hope down to look at her properly. "You're fancy," Hope countered, touching her mother's new dress. "Denver fancy. Not sure how well it'll hold up to farm work." Clara's eyes found Caleb standing on the clinic porch. Something passed between them: acknowledgement, warmth, the unspoken question of whether anything fundamental had changed during separation. Caleb walked over slowly, giving her space to breathe after the journey. "Welcome back. How was Denver?" "Exhausting, frustrating, occasionally triumphant. They're actually implementing reforms, creating oversight for land transactions, investigating suspicious deaths going back a decade. It's slow work, but it's happening." "That's remarkable." "It is. But also," Clara paused, choosing words carefully, "also not home. Denver's impressive and important, and I'm glad I went. But this is home. You and Hope and Ezra and even the damn chickens. This is where I belong." Hope beamed like she'd known this all along. Ezra nodded his approval from the barn doorway, and Caleb felt his heart do something complicated and terrifying and wonderful. "Then it's good you're back," he said quietly. "We missed you." Just missed me? Or actually missed me?
It was the kind of question that required honest answer. Caleb met Clara's eyes and let her see past the walls he'd built, the grief he'd carried, to the man underneath who'd somehow learned to hope again. Actually missed you, the kind of missing that made every day feel incomplete. Clara's smile transformed her face. Good, because I actually missed you too. And I think we should probably talk about what that means. Later, though, Hope interrupted, after Mama's rested and eaten and stopped being Denver fancy, important conversations need time. Clara laughed and pulled her daughter close. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise. You just noticed. They went inside together, family by choice rather than blood, carrying winter cold into warmth and lamplight. Outside, snow began falling, the first real storm of the season, covering everything in white silence.
And in the morning, when dawn broke clear and brutal, Caleb would wake to find Clara making coffee in the kitchen, Hope braiding grass stems despite the snow, Ezra already out checking animals. He'd join them in the rhythm of another day, another challenge, another chance to choose staying over running. But for now, in the quiet of winter solstice dark, he simply let himself feel grateful for the strange path that had led him here. From grief to purpose, from isolation to belonging, from a man who'd lost everything to one who'd found, against all odds, the possibility of having something worth losing again. The conversation Clara had mentioned didn't happen for 3 days, not because either of them was avoiding it, but because life on a frontier farm during winter didn't pause for personal revelations. A blizzard hit the day after her return, trapping them all inside for 48 hours while wind screamed and snow piled against the walls in drifts that reached the windowsills. Caleb spent those hours treating frostbite on one of Garrett's deputies who'd gotten caught in the storm, while Clara and Hope inventoried supplies and Ezra reinforced the barn roof against weight that threatened to collapse the whole structure. By the time the storm cleared, leaving the world transformed into something crystalline and impossible, they were all too exhausted for anything more profound than sleep. But on the third morning, Caleb woke before dawn to find Clara already up, standing on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching stars fade against approaching daylight. He joined her without speaking, two people comfortable enough with silence to let it say what words couldn't. Hope told me something while I was in Denver, Clara said eventually. In one of her letters, she said you were building a life here, not just passing time. Said she could see it in how you moved through spaces, like you were finally letting yourself believe you deserved to stay.
Hope sees too much sometimes, or exactly enough. Clara turned to face him, her breath misting in cold air. Caleb, I need to know what you want. Not what you think I want to hear, not what Hope's visions suggest. What do you actually want for yourself? The question deserved honesty. Caleb looked out at land covered in snow, at the clinic he'd built with his own hands, at the farm that had become home despite every intention to remain a ghost. I want to stop being afraid, he said quietly. Afraid that caring about people means watching them die. Afraid that building something means losing it. Afraid that I've already used up my quota of happiness and anything more is just borrowed time. He paused, gathering courage. But more than being afraid, I want this. Want you and Hope, and even Ezra's grumbling. Want patients who trust me and work that matters, and mornings like this where I wake up and don't immediately think about running. Clara absorbed this with the careful attention of someone who understood the weight of admission. And if I told you I want the same thing, want partnership instead of just survival, want someone who sees me as more than just Samuel's widow or Hope's mother, want to build something new without feeling like I'm betraying what came before, then I'd say we probably should stop dancing around it and actually talk about what comes next. All right then. Clara pulled her blankets tighter against the cold. Here's what I'm thinking. I go back to Denver quarterly for the consultation work. It pays well, keeps pressure on officials, gives me purpose beyond just managing the farm. But this? She gestured at the land around them. This is home base, where I come back to, where we build whatever this is becoming. What is it becoming? I don't know yet, but it feels important, like we're not just two broken people using each other as crutches. More like we're building something that wouldn't exist if either of us tried to do it alone. Clara met his eyes. Does that sound crazy? No, it sounds like exactly what I've been trying not to hope for because hoping hurt too much. And now,
Does hoping still hurt? Caleb considered the question honestly. The old fear was still there, the whisper that everything good eventually turned to ash. But beneath it was something stronger, the accumulated evidence of months spent proving that staying was possible, that caring didn't automatically lead to catastrophe. Less than it used to, he admitted. Still there. Probably always will be, but manageable now. Clara smiled, warm and real and beautiful in the pre-dawn light. Then I guess we're doing this, building something messy and complicated and hopefully lasting. What about Hope? She gets a say in this. Hope's been orchestrating this since the moment you showed up. I think she'll manage. As if summoned by her name, Hope appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a quilt and looking entirely too pleased with herself. Are you two done being scared yet? Because I'm getting tired of waiting for you to figure out what I've known since summer. And what's that? Caleb asked. That you belong together. Not in a fairy tale way where everything's perfect. In a real way where you help each other carry hard things and build good things and don't run when it gets complicated. Hope came to stand between them, her small hands finding one of each of theirs. You're going to get married eventually. I've seen it. But you have to actually decide to do it instead of just thinking about maybe possibly considering it. Clara laughed, the first genuine, unguarded laugh Caleb had heard from her since they'd met. Well, you heard the prophet. Apparently we're getting married. Eventually, Hope clarified. Not today. You need time to be sure. But by spring. When the wildflowers come. That's when it happens. You've seen this specifically? Caleb asked, bemused and charmed and slightly terrified by the certainty of a 7-year-old dictating his future. I have. You ask her on the ridge above the creek, where you can see 3 valleys. She says yes. I cry because I'm happy. Ezra pretends he's not crying, but he is. And then we have a party, and Mrs. Patterson makes too much food, and everyone in town comes because they want to celebrate something good for once. Sounds like you have this all planned out, Clara said gently. I don't plan it. I just see it. But you still have to choose it. That's the important part. The visions show possibilities, not certainties. You make them real by deciding they matter enough to work for. The wisdom of it settled over them like snow, soft and inevitable, and transforming everything it touched. Clara squeezed Caleb's hand and he squeezed back, and somewhere in that simple exchange they both acknowledged that Hope was right. This was happening. They were choosing it. Together. Winter deepened, bringing challenges that tested their resolve and strengthened their bond. A fever swept through Silver Creek in January, filling Caleb's clinic with patients who needed constant care. Clara worked alongside him, learning basic nursing, dosing medicine, sitting vigil with families through long nights when outcomes hung uncertain. Hope helped where she could, her visions warning which patients were declining despite surface improvement, allowing Caleb to intervene before crisis became catastrophe. They lost 3 people that winter, an elderly rancher whose lungs finally gave out, a child who'd been sick too long before his parents sought help, a woman in childbirth whose bleeding Caleb couldn't stop despite every skill he possessed. Each death hit hard, stirring old ghosts of Montana and the helplessness that came with practicing medicine in a place where resources were scarce and miracles were rare. But they saved dozens more. And Clara was there through every loss, steady and strong, reminding Caleb that saving most wasn't the same as failing all. Ezra's shoulder healed slowly but completely, giving him back full range of motion by February. The old man celebrated by falling off the barn roof while clearing snow and breaking his ankle, which put him right back to invalid status and made him insufferable for weeks. Hope appointed herself his primary caretaker, bringing him meals and books, and tolerating his grumbling with patience that would have impressed saints. She's good at this, Ezra observed one evening while Hope was outside feeding chickens. Taking care of people. Seeing what they need before they ask. She's going to make one hell of a frontier woman someday. She already is, Caleb said, just in a smaller package. True enough, but I meant when she's grown, when she's making her own decisions about what kind of life to build. That gift of hers, the visions, could take her anywhere. To cities, to universities, to people who'd study her like a curiosity or use her like a tool. Ezra's expression grew serious. You and Clara need to protect that. Make sure she knows she's valued for who she is, not just what she can do. We will, Caleb promised. Both of us.
together. Good. Because that girl deserves better than to be treated like a fortune teller or a freak. She deserves a family that sees her whole. Ezra smiled slightly. Which you're becoming, whether you've made it official yet or not. Hope says spring, on the ridge above the creek. Hope sees true, always has. Ezra adjusted his splinted ankle with a wince. You nervous? Terrified, but in a good way. The kind of fear that means something matters enough to be scared of losing it. That's the only kind of fear worth having. Everything else is just cowardice dressed up fancy. Letters from Denver continued through winter, bringing news of Clara's growing influence in territorial politics. She'd become something of a symbol, the widow who'd stood up to corruption and won, the woman who turned personal tragedy into systemic change. Officials courted her opinion, journalists quoted her extensively. The governor himself had asked her to sit on a commission investigating land fraud across the entire territory. Clara accepted these responsibilities with the same quiet competence she applied to everything else. But her letters made clear that her heart remained at the farm, with Hope and Caleb and the life they were building together. In March, when roads finally thawed enough for travel, Adelaide Shaw arrived with news that made even Hope's vision seem insufficient. The journalist dismounted from her horse looking triumphant and exhausted in equal measure. I need to show you something, she said without preamble, pulling a thick envelope from her saddlebag. This just came from Washington, from the Department of Interior. Inside were official documents, heavy with seals and signatures. Clara read them aloud while Caleb, Hope, and Ezra listened in growing amazement. The federal government was establishing a new division, the Bureau of Land Protection, tasked with investigating fraud, protecting property rights, and ensuring that frontier settlers received fair treatment under territorial law. Clara had been offered the position of regional director for Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana territories. The salary was substantial, the authority was real, the mandate was exactly what she'd been fighting for since Samuel's death. This is incredible, Caleb said when Clara finished reading. This is everything you wanted. It is, Clara agreed, but her expression was complicated, pride and uncertainty warring across her face. But it means relocating to Denver, at least part-time, maybe more. The work requires presence in the capital, access to officials, constant advocacy. She looked at Caleb. I can't do this job from a farm in Silver Creek. The implications hung in the air like smoke. This was the choice that mattered, not theoretical discussions about future possibilities, but concrete decision with real consequences. Clara could take this position and transform territorial governance, or she could stay here and continue the smaller work of consultation and advocacy. Hope spoke before Caleb could. You take it, Mama. This is what you're meant for, what Papa would have wanted, what the territory needs. But you will be fine. We all will. Mr. Thornton's here. Ezra's here. We'll manage the farm and the clinic. You come back when you can. We make it work because that's what families do. She's right, Caleb added, though his heart was doing complicated things at the thought of Clara leaving. You can't turn this down. It's too important. Clara looked between them, daughter and almost husband, both urging her toward the future she'd earned. What about getting married? Hope's vision, spring on the ridge? Visions change, Hope said calmly. Not the core truth that you two belong together, but the timing, the details. Those shift based on choices. If you take this job, the wedding happens later, summer maybe, when you're back from Denver with everything settled. The important part isn't when, it's that it happens at all. Are you sure? Clara asked Caleb directly. You just found a reason to stay. I don't want to be the reason you start running again. Caleb thought about that fear, the old instinct to flee when things got complicated. But beneath it was something stronger. The accumulated evidence that Clara's leaving for work wasn't the same as abandonment, that building a life meant supporting each other's purposes, not limiting them. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. You take this job. Do the work you're meant for. Change the territory. I'll be here when you get back, building the clinic, raising hope with Ezra's help, saving lives one patient at a time. And when you come home, we'll figure out the rest together. Clara's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. She crossed the space between them,
and kissed him. The first real kiss they'd shared, full of promise and partnership, and the complicated truth that love meant supporting each other's departures as much as celebrating returns. Hope made a satisfied sound. Finally, I was beginning to think you'd never actually touch each other. Even Ezra cracked a smile. About damn time. Adelaide cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt, but there's more. The Bureau wants me to document the whole process, your appointment, the work you'll be doing, the systemic changes being implemented. It'll be a series for the Post, possibly a book eventually, the story of how one woman's fight for justice transformed an entire region. I'm not a hero, Clara protested. I just refuse to roll over and die. That's exactly what makes you a hero. Most people do roll over. You didn't. And now others won't either because they saw what you did and realized resistance was possible. Adelaide's expression was serious. This story matters, Clara, not because it's dramatic, but because it's true. And true stories change what people believe is possible. Clara looked at the documents in her hands, at the future they represented. When do they need an answer? 2 weeks, but I suspect you already know what you're going to say. Clara nodded slowly. I take the position, I do the work, and I come back here as often as possible because this is home and these are my people. All of it, together. Then I'll need to interview all of you, Adelaide said, pulling out her notebook. The full story. Where you've been, where you're going, how you got from tragedy to triumph. They spent the next 3 days telling Adelaide everything, not just the dramatic moments of confrontation and violence, but the quiet work of healing and rebuilding, the small daily choices that added up to transformation. Adelaide documented it all with journalist's precision and storyteller's heart, turning their experiences into narrative that would resonate far beyond Silver Creek. When she finally left, her saddlebags were full of notes and photographs and the kind of raw material that turned into stories people remembered. This will run as a 10-part series starting next month, she told them. And I'm already talking to publishers about the book, The Seeing Child and the Surgeon Who Stopped Running. What do you think? I think you make us sound more impressive than we are, Caleb said. I think I'm telling the truth. There's a difference. Adelaide mounted her horse with practiced ease. Take care of each other. The work you're doing here, all of you, it matters more than you know. She rode off toward Denver and deadlines, leaving them standing in spring mud with the weight of their own story settling on their shoulders. Clara left for Denver a week later, accompanied by territorial rangers and carrying documents that made her official. Hope was brave through the goodbye, but Caleb saw tears on her face as Clara's carriage disappeared over the ridge. She'll be back, he assured her. I know, but it still hurts when people leave, even when they're leaving for good reasons. It does, but the hurt means you care, and caring is worth the cost. Hope leaned against his side, seeking comfort without asking for it. Are you scared? That she'll go to Denver and realize she doesn't need us anymore? Terrified, but I'm choosing to trust that she meant what she said, that this is home for her, same as it is for us. She did mean it. I can see the truth in people, remember? And Mama's truth is that she loves us, all of us. The work in Denver is important, but it's not more important than family. When did you get so wise about love? I've always been wise about love. It's everything else I'm still figuring out. They stood together watching the empty road until Ezra called them in for dinner. The weeks that followed established new rhythm, Caleb managing the clinic with Hope's help, Ezra handling farm work as his ankle healed, all of them adjusting to Clara's absence while refusing to let it define them. Letters came twice a week, full of Clara's experiences navigating bureaucracy and building alliances. She wrote about challenges and triumphs, about officials who supported reform and those who fought it, about slowly learning to wield authority she'd earned through suffering. But she also wrote about missing them, about counting days until she could return, about the wedding they'd delayed but not canceled. Caleb wrote back with updates on patients and farm, with Hope's latest visions and Ezra's recovery, with small domestic details that probably seemed trivial compared to Clara's work, but mattered because they were the texture of the life waiting for her return. In May, spring finally arrived in full force. The snow melted, revealing land that had survived winter and was ready to grow again. Wildflowers emerged in waves of color that transformed the valleys into something impossible. And on a warm afternoon when the world smelled like sage and new grass, Caleb took Hope and Ezra on a ride to the ridge above the creek where three valleys converged. The view was stunning, endless land rolling toward mountains still capped with snow, sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Hope dismounted and immediately started picking wildflowers, her small hands gentle with petals.
"This is where it happens," she said. "In my vision, where you asked Mama to marry you. You said spring, but Clara's in Denver. She's coming back, day after tomorrow. Didn't you read her last letter?" Hope looked at him with exasperation usually reserved for adults being deliberately obtuse. She finished the preliminary organization work, set up offices, hired staff, established protocols. Now she gets 2 months here before the next Denver session, long enough for a wedding and a proper honeymoon and figuring out how to balance both lives. Caleb pulled out Clara's most recent letter, reading it more carefully. Sure enough, buried in discussions of bureaucratic victories was a single line. "I'll be home May 15th. Clear your calendar." I missed that somehow. "Because you were reading for news about the work, not news about her coming home," Hope said with perfect 7-year-old logic. Adults do that sometimes. Focus on big things and miss the important things. Ezra chuckled from where he'd settled on a flat rock, his ankles stretched out. "The girl's got a point, Doc. You might want to start paying better attention to what your almost wife is actually saying." "She's not my almost wife yet." "She will be. Day after tomorrow if Hope's timeline holds. Which means you've got about 48 hours to figure out what you're going to say when you ask her." Ezra's expression turned serious. "You nervous about that part?" "Terrified. What if I mess it up?" "Then you mess it up and she says yes anyway because she's not marrying you for poetry. She's marrying you because you stayed when leaving was easier, because you helped her fight battles she couldn't win alone, because you love her daughter like she's your own." Ezra smiled. "Words don't matter nearly as much as you think they do. Just speak from the heart, and let that be enough." Caleb looked out over the three valleys, imagining Clara standing here beside him, imagining asking the question that would tie their futures together permanently. The old fear rose up. What if he failed her? What if something happened and he couldn't protect her, couldn't save her, couldn't be what she needed? But beneath the fear was something stronger, the accumulated evidence of months spent proving that staying was possible, that love didn't have to end in tragedy, that building something together was worth the risk of losing it. "All right," he said quietly. "Day after tomorrow. Here on the ridge. I ask her to marry me." "And she says yes," Hope added confidently. "I've seen it." Clara arrived as promised, looking exhausted and exhilarated and more beautiful than Caleb remembered. She embraced Hope with fierce joy, hugged Ezra carefully around his healing injuries, and kissed Caleb like she'd been storing up affection through months of separation. "I missed you," she said against his mouth. "Missed you too, more than words cover." "Then show me later. Right now, I just want to be home." They spent that evening and the next day in domestic simplicity. Clara catching up on farm business, playing with Hope, sitting with Ezra while he told stories about managing through her absence. She seemed genuinely happy to be back, shedding Denver's sophistication for worn work clothes and bare feet on porch boards. On the morning of the second day, Caleb asked if she'd ride with him to see the ridge above the creek. "Hope says the view's particularly good this time of year." Clara smiled knowingly. "Does she? And what else does Hope say?" "That I should probably stop being nervous and just do what I came to do." Sound advice from a wise child. Clara called to Hope and Ezra that they'd be back by lunch and mounted up beside Caleb with the ease of someone who'd grown up on horseback. They rode in comfortable silence, letting the morning wash over them, birdsong and wind through grass, the solid rhythm of horses moving across land that belonged to them in ways deeper than ownership. When they reached the ridge, Clara dismounted and stood looking out over the three valleys with expression of pure peace. "This is perfect," she said quietly. Hope was right. The view's remarkable. Caleb dismounted beside her, his heart hammering with nervousness that seemed ridiculous for a man who'd faced death and violence and loss beyond measure. But asking this question mattered more than any of that. This was choosing future over past, hope over fear, building over running. "Clara," he began, then stopped, words failing him. She turned to face him, her expression gentle. "You're nervous."
terrified. Of what? Of failing you. Of not being what you need. Of losing you the way I lost everyone else who mattered. The admission came out raw and honest. Of asking you to tie your life to mine when mine's been nothing but wreckage for years. Clara reached up, her hand cupping his face with tenderness that made his throat tight. Caleb, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be present, to stay when things get hard, to build this life with me one day at a time without knowing if tomorrow brings triumph or tragedy. She smiled. I'm not looking for someone to save me. I'm looking for someone to stand beside me while we save each other. I can do that, Caleb said. Want to do that. Want to wake up every morning and choose this, choose you and hope, and whatever comes next for the rest of my life. He took her hands in his. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you let me be part of this family you're building? Will you trust me enough to say yes, even though we both know nothing's guaranteed and everything's uncertain? Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Yes. Yes to all of it, to uncertainty and risk and building something beautiful from broken pieces. Yes to partnership and family, and staying when leaving would be easier. She pulled him close, her forehead resting against his. Yes to you, Caleb Thornton, for as long as we both have. They kissed there on the ridge, with wildflowers blooming around them and 3 valleys spreading below, sealing promises that had been building since the moment he'd heard Hope's voice calling for help and made the choice to stop running. When they finally pulled apart, Clara laughed softly. Hope's going to be insufferable about being right. She's already insufferable about it. This just confirms what she's been saying for months. True. Should we head back? Let her say I told you so? In a minute. I just want to stand here with you a little longer. Remember this moment before the chaos of planning and ceremony takes over. So they stood together watching the wind move through grass. 2 people who'd survived their separate catastrophes learning to build something that wouldn't erase the past but might redeem it through the simple act of choosing to keep living, keep loving, keep believing that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. When they finally rode back to the farm, they found Hope and Ezra waiting on the porch. Hope took one look at their faces and let out a whoop of pure joy. You did it! You asked and she said yes, and now we get to have a wedding. You saw this coming, Clara said, scooping her daughter up. I did. But it's still exciting when visions become real, when possibilities turn into actual futures. Hope looked between them seriously. You're going to be happy. Not every day, not without work, but happy enough that the hard days don't break you. I've seen that too. That's all anyone can ask for, Caleb said. Ezra stood with some difficulty, his ankles still tender but functional. Well, congratulations, you two. About damn time you made it official. It's been less than a year since we met, Clara pointed out. Felt like longer, good kind of longer. Ezra pulled them both into an awkward group hug. Now let's get inside and plan this wedding before Hope explodes from anticipation. The wedding happened 6 weeks later on a Sunday in late June, when the world was green and gold and temporarily generous. They held it at the farm because that's where their story had unfolded, where they'd fought and survived and built something worth celebrating. Mrs. Patterson from the hotel organized food with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been watching this romance develop and felt personally invested in its success. Half of Silver Creek turned out. Patients Caleb had treated, families Clara had helped through the Land Bureau, people who'd followed their story through Adelaide's articles and wanted to witness its next chapter. Marshall Garrett performed the ceremony, having been ordained specifically for frontier weddings when official clergy were scarce. He kept it simple and honest, speaking about partnership and courage, and the kind of love that survived hardship rather than avoiding it. Hope stood beside her mother wearing a new dress and a crown of wildflowers, crying happy tears exactly as she'd predicted. Ezra gave Clara away with gruff pride, his own eyes suspiciously bright. And when Caleb and Clara exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about staying and building and facing whatever came together, there wasn't a dry eye in the assembled crowd. Adelaide Shaw documented everything with her camera and notebook, capturing images and moments that would become the final chapter of her series. But she was also genuinely happy for them, celebrating friends rather than just recording subjects. The celebration lasted until sunset, filled with food and music and the kind of joy that comes from communal acknowledgement that something good had happened in a world that didn't guarantee good things. People danced in the yard, children ran wild through fields, and for a few hours the frontier felt less harsh and more like home. As darkness fell and guests began departing, Clara found Caleb standing alone near the creek, watching stars emerge in the deepening sky. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, her head resting against his back. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That 4 years ago I couldn't have imagined this. Couldn't have imagined feeling anything but grief. And now here I am, married to a remarkable woman, father to a prophet child, part of something that feels like family." He turned in her arms to face her. "It doesn't erase what I lost, but it proves I can survive loss, can build something new from ruins." "We both can," Clara said. "That's the whole point. Neither of us could do this alone, but together we're stronger than what broke us." They stood together listening to the creek and distant celebration, two people who'd earned their happiness through suffering and chosen to claim it anyway. Inside the house, Hope was showing Ezra her latest sketches, visions of futures still unfolding, possibilities not yet certain. She'd seen a baby in Clara's arms, seen the clinic expanding into something larger, seen seasons changing and challenges coming, and all of them facing whatever arrived together. But she'd also learned that visions were guides, not guarantees, that the future was built by choices made in present moments, by people deciding what mattered enough to fight for. And as she looked out the window at her mother and Caleb silhouetted against the stars, Hope smiled. Because she'd seen this too. Not just the wedding, but everything that came after. The work and the joy, the setbacks and the triumphs, the ordinary, extraordinary miracle of people choosing each other day after day until choosing became as natural as breathing. The story that had begun with a child dragging a bleeding man through dust and a drifter hearing a voice he couldn't ignore had become something neither of them could have predicted, had become family forged in fire, purpose built from pain, love that didn't erase the past but honored it by refusing to let tragedy have the final word. Summer deepened into the kind of heat that made the horizon shimmer. Caleb and Clara settled into married life with the practical adjustment of people who'd already been functioning as partnership long before the ceremony made it official. She continued her work for the Bureau of Land Protection, traveling to Denver quarterly but always returning to the farm where Caleb practiced medicine and Hope continued growing into her strange gifts. 3 months after the wedding, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Hope had seen it coming, of course, and had already started knitting tiny blankets with Ezra's dubious help. The baby, a boy they named Samuel after Clara's first husband and Caleb's father, arrived in early spring, healthy and loud and immediately adored by his prophet sister who claimed she'd been waiting for him for months. The clinic expanded as Caleb's reputation grew. He trained 2 young women from town in nursing, hired a part-time assistant to manage paperwork, and began teaching basic medicine to anyone who wanted to learn. The work was exhausting and fulfilling, exactly what he'd needed without knowing how to ask for it. Ezra lived to see his 80th birthday, surrounded by the family he'd helped build. He died peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, his last words to Hope, a request that she keep seeing true and never let anyone convince her that truth was worth hiding. They buried him on the ridge above the creek where 3 valleys met, where Caleb had proposed and where Hope often went to sit and watch futures unfold in the patterns of clouds and wind through grass. Adelaide Shaw's book was published to critical acclaim and popular success, transforming their story into something larger than themselves. The proceeds funded a scholarship for frontier women seeking education and opportunity beyond what their circumstances suggested was possible. Clara administered it through the Bureau, ensuring that other widows and daughters would have chances she'd had to fight for. Years passed. Hope grew into a young woman whose visions guided her toward medicine rather than prophecy, working alongside Caleb in the clinic and eventually attending university in Denver to study anatomy and physiology. She returned with a medical degree and a quiet husband who didn't mind that his wife saw futures he couldn't, and together they expanded the practice into a proper hospital that served 3 counties. Samuel grew up riding horses and helping with farm work, showing no prophetic gifts but plenty of his mother's determination and his father's gentleness. He became a lawyer, fighting corruption with legal precedents instead of rifles, carrying forward the work his parents had started. And Caleb and Clara aged together, their hair graying and bodies slowing, but their partnership deepening with accumulated years of choosing each other through good times and hard ones. They'd survived loss and built something beautiful. They'd taken broken pieces and created family. They'd proven that running from pain wasn't the only option, that stopping and staying and building could heal wounds that time alone never would. On a summer evening, 40 years after Caleb first heard Hope's voice calling for help, he sat on the porch with Clara watching sunset paint the western sky in shades of amber and blood. Their grandchildren played in the yard where Cain's men had once threatened violence. The clinic-turned-hospital glowed with lamplight as Hope treated her evening patients. The land that Clara had nearly lost to corruption stretched fertile and free in every direction. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Stopping here instead of keeping running? All the complications and challenges and hard years mixed in with the good ones?" Caleb thought about that question honestly, running through decades of memory, the grief that never fully left, the patience he couldn't save, the nights when old fears returned and made him wonder if happiness was real or just temporary delusion. But he also thought about Hope's laugh, and Samuel's first steps, and the way Clara's hands still fit perfectly in his after all these years, about the hundreds of lives saved in the clinic, about the systemic changes Clara had fought for that protected families across 3 territories, about the ordinary, extraordinary miracle of building something lasting from moments that could have broken them both. "Not once," he said, "not for a single second." Clara squeezed his hand, her grip still strong despite arthritis and age. "Good. Because I wouldn't have survived without you. None of us would have. We survived each other. That's different. Better." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead. 2 people who'd learned that the best stories didn't end with happily ever after, but with the honest acknowledgement that happiness required work and staying, required courage and love, required choosing each other even when, especially when, it would be easier to walk away. Inside the house, Hope found the letter her mother had written years ago, to be opened only after Clara's death. It contained instructions for the farm, messages for grandchildren, and a single paragraph addressed to Caleb. "Thank you for hearing our daughter's voice when you could have kept walking. Thank you for staying when running was all you knew. Thank you for showing me that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story, just a chapter that makes the rest more precious. You gave me back my life when I thought I'd lost it forever. I hope I gave you back yours. We were broken people who helped fix each other, exactly like Hope said. That's the best kind of love there is." Hope put the letter back unread. It wasn't time yet. Her mother still had years ahead. She could see it clearly. More grandchildren to spoil, more corruption to fight, more sunsets to watch beside the man who'd stopped running long enough to build a life worth living. The story that had begun with desperation and violence and a child's impossible visions had become something quieter and more profound, had become proof that stopping was sometimes the bravest choice, that staying required more courage than leaving, that building something together from broken pieces was the only kind of redemption that truly lasted. And on that summer evening, with fireflies beginning their dance and the world settling into the comfortable darkness of a day well lived, Caleb Thornton, surgeon, husband, father, the man who'd finally stopped running, closed his eyes and gave thanks for the voice that had called him back to life, and the family that had made life worth answering. The seeing child had seen true, and the story she'd predicted ended exactly where it needed to, not with certainty or perfection, but with people who loved each other choosing to stay together through everything that mattered, building futures one decision at a time until the accumulation of choices became a life worth remembering.